A doctor frantically writes in his journal, "It's almost impossible to believe everything that's transpired has taken place in such a short amount of time. It all began 3 days ago. It was just another day down in the mines. A worker was drilling into a seam of coal when suddenly there was an issue with the rig. From what I've gathered, it sounds like the drill bit exploded due to some kind of mechanical defect, sending shards of metal flying throughout the tunnel. The worker was lucky that none of the large pieces struck him, as they surely would have been fatal. He had, though, still been grazed by a piece of shrapnel from the ruined drill bit, and it had left a deep cut across his upper arm. Other miners who were working nearby heard the commotion and quickly came to his aid. They applied a tourniquet to stem the flow of blood and helped him to the mineshaft elevator for the long ride to the surface. Once they reached the safety of daylight, they brought the injured man to the on-site medical clinic, where I was on duty at the time. I cleaned the wound since there was a substantial amount of coal dust that had gotten inside, before suturing and bandaging it. The miner was sent to his bunkhouse to recover, and I thought that would be the end of it. Of course, it was only the beginning. Roughly 24 hours later, the same miner presented himself to me once again. I asked about his injury, and he explained that while his arm was fine, he now felt like he might be coming down with an illness. His symptoms included a runny nose, a cough, and body aches, so my assumption was that he'd simply had some bad luck and caught a cold that just so happened to coincide with being injured on the job. I sent him to his bunk once again, telling him that he wouldn't be able to work and should instead use the day to rest and recover. The next day, I was once again in the clinic when my phone rang. It wasn't the sick miner, but instead his supervisor. The miner hadn't shown up for his shift that morning, and he asked for me to go check on him since he knew he hadn't been feeling well. I agreed that it was strange that neither of us had heard anything else from the miner and went to see him straight away. I entered the bunkhouse where many of the workers stay while on site at this remote mine. It was empty, except for the injured miner who was still in his bed. As I approached, I could immediately tell something was very wrong. The man was curled up in the fetal position and was sweating profusely while also shivering. A quick touch of his forehead revealed that the man had a high fever, too. He was practically incoherent, seemingly delirious from his high temperature. The miner was moved to the empty bed inside the clinic so I could better observe and tend to him, but very carefully since I assumed now that he was actually suffering from influenza and didn't want to risk an outbreak at the mine. I was getting ready to administer fluids to the miner, who was still mumbling incomprehensibly, when I noticed something on his face. It appeared that he was crying, but the tears that ran down his cheeks weren't made of water. They were blood. I hadn't seen anything like it before. There was no reason why influenza should be causing this man to cry tears of blood. I could see the veins in his forehead starting to pulse, as if his blood pressure had suddenly skyrocketed. And just as I was leaning in to get a closer look, something horrible happened. The miner suddenly opened his mouth and expelled an enormous stream of blood. The blast of blood struck me in the face and knocked me backwards in fright, as the man continued expelling more and more blood from his mouth, which soon covered the walls of the clinic. With seemingly all the blood having been discharged from his body, the man then went limp. I attempted to resuscitate him, but strangely, there was no need. The man was comatose, but he was alive. There I was, standing in the middle of the clinic over the man, both he, myself, as well as the room completely covered in blood. It was one of the worst things I'd ever experienced as a doctor, and yet, somehow, it was about to get even worse. I was still in shock from what had just happened when I heard the door to the clinic open behind me. I turned around to see a group of half a dozen more miners from the site, each one coughing, sweating, and shivering. One held a cloth to his ear that was stained red, while another attempted to stop his nose from bleeding. Whatever had infected the first patient wasn't a one-off medical event. This had the makings of an epidemic. I knew that I was in way over my head. I was just a general practitioner, not an infectious disease specialist, and I called the Center for Disease Control to get their guidance. I was told to quarantine the sick man as best I could, and that a rapid response team would be sent who were better equipped to deal with potential outbreaks. While I waited for the CDC to arrive, I began moving the afflicted men to a bunkhouse that had been designated for quarantining. Several more also began expelling huge amounts of blood, though unlike the first patient, none of the others survived the traumatic event. As I was putting the final infected man into a bed, I noticed something, though. There was a huge amount of heat radiating off of his lower body, and when I pulled down the blankets, I discovered something that even with all of the strange happenings, I still couldn't believe. There were huge lumps growing on his legs, each of which looked to be filled with some kind of fluid or gas, and they were extremely hot to the touch, as if the chemicals inside the lumps were creating a source of heat. As I was investigating the bizarre growths, I suddenly looked up to see that the man was no longer in a state of delirium. Instead, a crazed look had come over his eyes, and he suddenly leapt out of bed, flailing and clawing at me as if he wanted to kill me. I don't know how, but I was able to fight off the man and run out of the bunkhouse. He gave chase, though, and with no other option, I ran into a nearby storage shed. The man was beating and scratching at the door, but I was able to barricade it by dragging a heavy shelf in front of it. After several minutes of trying to break inside, he finally gave up and left. And here I remain. I'm too afraid to go back out. It seems that if the disease won't kill me, then whatever it is turning people into will. All I can do is wait for the CDC team to get here and hopefully know how to deal with whatever this situation has become. The doctor closes his small notebook and notices a drop of something fall onto the cover. He reaches up and wipes his hand across his mouth. It comes back, covered in blood. The doctor didn't know what the disease was that had so rapidly spread through the workers at the mine, nor did the CDC response team when they arrived. No, it wasn't until the SCP Foundation caught word of the mysterious outbreak that someone would finally determine what was happening with what would soon be called SCP-016, which is also known as the Sentient Micro-Organism. SCP-016 is a blood-borne pathogen that was first discovered after a worker at a remote mine was injured while drilling into a coal seam deep beneath the earth. It is theorized that coal dust entered the wound, dust which perhaps carried dormant spores of what would become SCP-016. Over the next several days, all of the remaining employees at the mine were infected, as was the CDC crisis team that was sent to the mine to investigate the outbreak of what was potentially an undiscovered pathogen. Following the CDC's inability to deal with the disease, the SCP Foundation took over the site and quickly terminated all affected personnel in order to prevent further spread. The first infected person, Patient 0, was taken into Foundation custody for further investigation, and the mine shaft itself was collapsed by an explosive device in order to seal it off. After studying Patient 0, the Foundation learned a great deal about just what they were dealing with. What they found was that SCP-016 has an incubation period that can vary wildly from just 24 hours to as long as 2 years, with the length appearing to be dependent on the number of other potential human hosts in the immediate area. Once symptoms begin to present in an individual, they will at first look to be quite similar to the common cold. They can include coughing, a runny nose, itchy eyes, and body aches. Roughly 48 hours after the first symptoms, the infected person will experience a form of hemorrhagic fever similar to the Ebola virus, which causes a small amount of bleeding in the lungs. This leads to the infected blood becoming aspirated, most likely in order to better spread through the air. The third stage of the disease leads to the host crashing and bleeding out as they start to bleed profusely from multiple body orifices, including the nose, tear ducts, mouth, and even through the pores of their skin. Their blood pressure will also skyrocket during this final stage, and in some cases have vomited blood as far as 5 meters. Oddly enough, although most die from the traumatic event, this almost complete exsanguination will not always result in death. Sometimes, following the removal of almost all blood from the body, the patient will somehow survive, and the pathogen inside their body will return to its dormant phase once again, before eventually repeating the process. But SCP-016 is more than just a rapid and often deadly bloodborne disease, as you will soon see. As SCP researchers studied the disease, what they discovered was that it had a very strange property that sets it apart from other hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola and the Marburg virus. What they found was that when someone infected with SCP-016 is placed into a high-stress situation, such as one where their life is being threatened, SCP-016 will transition from rapidly reproducing inside of its host's body to instead begin rewriting their host's actual DNA. This genetic manipulation, combined with the stimulation of rapid cell division, leads to the host undergoing major physiological changes and in extremely small amounts of time. In just 24 hours, the host can begin showing physical changes to their body, and a complete bodily reconstruction can occur in less than 2 weeks. Most of the hosts who begin to undergo physical changes will not survive the process, due to how heavily the transformation stresses the body, but those that do will be changed in more than just physical ways. They'll exhibit hyper-aggressive behaviors, not dissimilar to those infected by rabies. And it's theorized that the pathogen may cause this behavior in order to better spread the virus. When the Foundation realized that SCP-016 was capable of these transformative effects, they immediately undertook a number of experiments on D-Class personnel in order to better understand their full extent. In the first test, a D-Class was infected with SCP-016, and as soon as they began showing symptoms, their cell was slowly flooded with water in order to stimulate the life-threatening situation needed to trigger the transformation process. Over the next 24 hours, researchers watched as the subject appeared to develop gills, which would allow it to survive in the now water-filled cell. The transformations didn't stop there, though, and over the next 2 weeks, the subject also had their limbs change into fins, their eyesight deteriorated, and their sense of hearing increased as they developed an echolocation ability very similar to the one employed by whales and dolphins. The experiment was concluded by removing all of the water from the cell, leading to the death of the subject from asphyxiation, as they could no longer breathe in the open air. A similar experiment was performed on another D-Class, but this time, instead of taking on aquatic animal properties, the D-Class experienced rapid muscle growth and their knuckles grew bone-like protrusions. It attempted to use both of these to break through the door of their flooding cell, but they were unable to breach the reinforced steel and soon died from drowning. The Foundation now knew that the virus could react in different ways to the same situation. The same experiment was run a third time, but in this instance, the infected D-Class exhibited an entirely different means of trying to escape. The subject had a massive growth appear on its chest, which seemed to be fed from 2 different tubes of flesh, also emanating from the subject's body. Fearing what it planned to do, the Foundation ended the experiment early and terminated the subject. An autopsy revealed that the growth was actually a hollow chamber that was being fed by the tubes with oxygen and acetylene gas, which when combined in sufficient amounts would cause a massive combustion event. In other words, SCP-016 was turning the subject into a living bomb. Moving on from flooded cell tests, the researchers next left the D-Class inside of a room with no stressing elements, and instead told them to focus on growing a pair of wings. Without any reason to begin the transformation process, SCP-016 went through its normal stages, and the subject died from blood loss without any other changes occurring. In the final test, a D-Class was placed inside of an acrylic box that was suspended over a mine shaft, with a timer attached indicating the time when the bottom of the box would open and drop the D-Class into the 1,000-foot deep shaft. This D-Class was also told to focus on growing wings that would allow them to survive the plunge. The subject began to transform over the next 24 hours, but rather than grow wings, they instead developed a tentacle-like appendage on their arm that was capable of producing silk, similar to a spider's spinneret. They used the silk-producing organ to secure themselves to the box, showing that subjects did not appear to be able to control the way in which SCP-016 would alter their bodies. This experiment concluded when the timer reached 0 and the bomb attached to it detonated, as had been the plan all along. Following this last test, SCP-016 samples were placed into containment, and access to the sample for experimental purposes is only allowed with prior authorization from Level 4 or 05 personnel, with full documentation of the proposed experiment required beforehand. Failure to follow any of these procedures will lead to the offending personnel being reassigned to D-Class duty or terminated. SCP-016 has been classified as Keter, and the only existing sample is kept in a petri dish which is under extreme lockdown inside of a 5x5 by 5 meter room, where the temperature is kept below 0 degrees Celsius at all times. Should an outbreak of SCP-016 occur, all infected personnel are to be immediately terminated on site, and if the infection cannot be contained within 48 hours, then the on-site nuclear device is to be detonated prior to any additional personnel being evacuated. While the containment procedures may sound callous, unfortunately, when it comes to anomalous pathogens as dangerous as SCP-016, no chances can be taken.
Emily huddled in the corner of the bathroom stall. Her lunch lay untouched on her lap as she nervously reviewed her exam material. Outside the walls of the stall, classmates chatted about makeup and crushes. The bell rang and the schoolgirls poured out of the bathroom. Emily took a deep breath and stepped out of the stall. She washed her hands, all the while avoiding looking down at them. She knew her fingertips were a mess, raw and slightly bleeding. She stared straight ahead at the mirror, muttering reassurances to herself. "You can do this. You're going to pass this exam." The hallways were silent and deserted as Emily stopped at her classroom door. She looked through the window at the neat rows of desks. Sat behind each one was a student, exuding calmness, ready for the exam. It was so different from her own frazzled appearance. Her breath shook and her hand trembled as she pushed the door open, its creak echoing in the quiet hallway. As she entered the classroom, some students looked up and snickered, but Emily was focused. She needed to find her seat and pass this test. The classroom seemed to blur around her as she focused on the exam paper in front of her. Her anxiety hit a peak, and her fingers automatically moved to her mouth. As Emily attacked her exam questions and her fingertips with equal ferocity, whispers turned to gasps, then to screams. "She's a monster!" one student cried out. Emily, deeply absorbed, kept writing, unaware of the chaos brewing around her. Confronted with the final question of the exam, Emily bit down on her fingernail until a loud crunch filled the room. A few students fainted. One vomited. The rest were in too much shock to react. When the teacher came over to help, Emily, still lost in her exam, accidentally shoved her away. Blood was sent splattering across the floor and onto her paper. Emily's eyes moved from her stunned teacher to her own hands, her expression turning to horror. Still, her mind urged her on. Wipe the blood away, keep writing. She continued until paramedics arrived and pulled her from her desk. In the plain, clinical office of the psychiatrist, Emily sat with her injured finger tightly wrapped in gauze. Blood still seeped through, staining it red. The psychiatrist, a woman with a calm yet assertive manner, started to discuss everything that led to her being committed to this facility. Unaware, Emily began nibbling on her other hand. "Do you know what a coping mechanism is?" the psychiatrist asked in a gentle but firm tone. Emily, her eyes misting with tears, shook her head slightly while her hand moved instinctively to her mouth. "It's something you do to reduce stress or discomfort," the psychiatrist explained, observing Emily closely. "But if it hurts you, it's considered maladaptive, like your nail biting." Emily stopped biting and clenched her hand into a fist in her lap, fighting the urge. "Do you remember the first time you started biting your nails?" the psychiatrist asked. Emily nodded, her mind drifting back to a dark memory she wished she could forget. "It was years ago," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just a little girl." She described the night it all started, her father drunk and aggressive, her mother coming home late to spark a violent argument. Sent to her room, Emily listened as the noise grew, yelling, something breaking, a loud thud. Curiosity drew her out, only to find her mother on the floor, her father standing over her, anger coursing through every sinew. That's when Emily started crying uncontrollably until she bit her tongue. The pain cut through her sobs. "That was when I learned that pain," Emily said, looking into the psychiatrist's eyes. "Pain could silence the fear, the anxiety. It made everything quiet." The psychiatrist wrote this down, her face reflecting deep consideration. "You've carried this way of coping into your adolescence," she noted. "Now we need to find healthier ways for you to manage your feelings." Emily watched the psychiatrist, her feelings a tangle of fear and hope. As her fingers slowly moved back toward her mouth, the psychiatrist handed her a small, bright ball. "Let's keep your hands busy," she suggested. Emily took the ball and squeezed it, shifting her focus to the pressure in her grasp rather than the pain. Later that day, in the recreation room, Emily couldn't help but feel like she'd accidentally stumbled into a preschool class, not a psychiatric facility. There she was, notably the eldest, towering over kids like a giant. Their little hands were fitted with bandages, a telltale sign that they all shared a fondness for compulsive habits. It should have made her fit right in. It didn't. Emily gripped the stress ball as she took a seat in one of the small chairs. She thought about playing checkers with the boy seated beside her, but decided against it. Instead, she started peeling away the gauze from her finger. The room went quiet. The children watched, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe. The little boy next to her fidgeted, uneasy, "We're not supposed to do that," he murmured, his voice filled with a mix of fear and fascination. Emily gave a half-smile, her face showing a blend of sadness and defiance. "Sometimes the rules are too hard to keep," she whispered, tossing him the stress ball. As Emily pulled off the final layer of bandages, revealing the raw, sensitive skin underneath, a noticeable shift occurred among the watching children. They looked at their own wrapped hands, and then back at Emily. Emily's small act of defiance seemed to linger heavily in the room. Within moments, all the children began unwrapping their bandages and feasting on their nails and fingertips. Recognizing Emily's potential to influence the other children, the staff decided to place her in solitary confinement. The room was stark, equipped only with a chair and a camera to record every moment under close surveillance. The psychiatrist glared at Emily, while the nurses tightly secured her limbs to the chair with leather straps to prevent self-harm. "You started a feeding frenzy," the psychiatrist sternly said, watching Emily's reaction closely. "You can't bite your nails in front of the kids." With that, she turned on her heel and slammed the door shut, leaving Emily alone. Only the closed-circuit television kept her company, the prying eyes beyond watching her, staring at her. Confined, Emily's anxiety soared to new heights. Every single movement caused the restraints to strain and dig into her skin, stark reminder of her confinement. Overwhelmed by a growing desperation, she gnawed at the leather straps with unexpected ferocity. Her teeth had become surprisingly sharp, her desperation transforming them into something wild and untamed. Maybe she was a monster. Would that be such a bad thing? Monsters are strong. Monsters aren't broken or afraid. Monsters are survivors. Once free of her shackles, Emily quickly removed the remaining gauze from her hands. Beneath the wraps, her fingers had undergone a shocking change. They were no longer topped with human nails, but had morphed into sharp, black, chitinous points. A wild giggle escaped her as she looked over her new claws. A wave of power washed over her, wiping away any remnants of the fragile, subdued girl she had once been. Turning to face the camera that had been watching her every move, her eyes glinted with a fierce, unsettling joy. She lunged at the lens, attacking it with her new claws. The camera vibrated violently as her last look, a chilling, victorious smirk, fizzed into static before the screen abruptly went black. She had become SCP-8480-A. SCP-8480, classified with a containment class of Keter, a disruption class of Eki, and a risk class of Critical, refers to an anomalous mental disorder affecting children aged 3 to 14, known as SCP-8480-1 instances. These children exhibit a range of symptoms from moderate to severe anxiety, headaches or migraines, intensive nail biting, onychophagia, skin-eating dermatophagia, unusually rapid healing, and a high tolerance for pain in their digits. The disorder typically activates under conditions of extreme, persistent anxiety or traumatic experiences, particularly if the child uses nail biting as a coping mechanism during such times. Following infection, the progression of symptoms in SCP-8480-1 instances varies depending on internal and external stress factors. A significant number of cases may persist into adulthood without clear symptoms. Currently, a substantial number of infected children, recorded in the thousands, are under the care of the Foundation, having been committed before reaching the age of 15. A notable subject, SCP-8480-A, or Emily Curtis, age 20, was significantly older than typical instances at the time of discovery. Stage 1 of SCP-8480 can initiate any time before adolescence, typically affecting children around the age of 9, although cases as young as 3 months have been noted. Diagnosing infants is challenging as they lack teeth. Early signs often exude sucking on fingers or gumming their limbs. Regardless of age, SCP-8480-1 instances exhibit initial symptoms within 2 to 3 days of the triggering event. During this stage, instances commonly experience low to moderate anxiety throughout most days. They may also suffer from mild physical discomforts, such as stomach aches or headaches, which are frequently dismissed as common childhood complaints. Moreover, these children develop various maladaptive coping strategies, including skin picking, hair pulling, and notably, nail biting, which they often describe as providing the most relief. A troubling psychological symptom is the onset of a deep-seated belief among the affected children that there is something fundamentally wrong with them, which cannot be corrected. It remains unclear whether this belief is a direct symptom of SCP-8480 or a psychological side effect of the disorder. Without intervention, children typically progress to Stage 2 within 6 months to a year from the appearance of the first symptoms. Stage 2, referred to as stasis, marks a deepening of the initial symptoms observed in SCP-8480-1 instances. In this stage, the afflicted children become heavily dependent on their maladaptive coping mechanisms to manage their emotional states. Despite attempts through medical, psychological, or therapeutic interventions, these behaviors persist unabated and intensify. During Stage 2, instances notably increase their reliance on nail-biting and skin-eating, which are used consistently to regulate their emotions. This escalation in behavior frequently results in physical injury, with instances often experiencing bleeding due to the severity of their actions. SCP-8480-1 instances are capable of remaining in this stage indefinitely. Notably, SCP-8480-A is the oldest recorded instance who had remained in Stage 2 until just before being admitted into Foundation care. Progression to Stage 3 occurs only after an SCP-8480-1 instance endures a significant and prolonged period of stress, anxiety, and traumatic experiences. The specific circumstances that catalyze this transition vary from individual to individual, making it challenging to predict exactly what will trigger the advancement to Stage 3. Stage 3, termed Complete Infection, marks a critical phase for SCP-8480-1 instances, where mitigation of symptoms and reduction of self-inflicted injuries become the primary focus, as further recovery is not feasible. In this stage, all previous symptoms escalate from moderate to severe, accompanied by several distinct and severe anomalous effects. The skin and muscles in the fingers and hands of affected individuals soften significantly, making them more susceptible to damage. Biting their fingers, nail beds, or hands triggers the production of nerve blockers and endorphins in the brain. This adaptation reduces pain and provides a brief sensation of pleasure, complicating the cessation of these behaviors. The hardening of the teeth enables instances to bite through not just flesh, but also bone, intensifying the severity of their condition. Anomalous cellular regeneration is heightened, leading to rapid tissue repair and forcing a cyclical pattern of self-consumption to manage emotional distress. Instances develop a compulsive need to consume the flesh and nails around their fingers, driven by their accelerated healing rates. Affected subjects experience a profound psychological impact, feeling fundamentally broken and no longer identifying as human. This manifests in a loss of interest in normal human activities, including eating anything other than their own body. Current research efforts are directed towards finding potential cures or methods to neutralize SCP-8480. However, no effective treatment has been discovered yet. Instances in Stage 3 will persist in this state until their biological functions cease, underscoring the dire nature of this advanced stage of SCP-8480. Stage 4, known as Reclamation, represents a profound transformation in SCP-8480-1 instances, believed to occur after a period of deep self-reflection and acceptance of the traumas that triggered their condition. This stage is only reached when an instance stops the constant self-consumption of their fingernails and surrounding tissues. The symptoms characteristic of Stage 4 include complete cessation of pain, although it remains unclear whether this lack of sensation is due to physiological changes or psychological factors. A significant reduction in anxiety levels, which drop to minor or negligible. The nature of this reduction, whether anomalous or not, is yet to be determined. While compulsive behaviors like nail-biting and skin-eating cease, subjects continue to exhibit other maladaptive coping mechanisms and signs of psychological distress. The development of black chitinous growths in place of fingernails, which are capable of cutting through metal, stone, and organic materials, marking a significant physical anomaly. Enhanced physical capabilities, including increased strength, endurance, and metabolism, which contribute to a heightened state of existence. Marked increase in hostility towards Foundation staff, coupled with a refusal to remain in containment, posing significant challenges to management and security. Due to these complexities and the substantial threat posed to normalcy, Containment protocols for SCP-8480-1 instances in Stage 4 have been entirely revised. All previous treatment approaches have been suspended indefinitely, reflecting a shift in strategy in response to the unique challenges presented by this advanced stage. All SCP-8480-1 instances are mandated to be isolated and contained at Site-80-P, ostensibly under extended psychiatric care. Bandages, gauze, splints, and casts are provided only upon the instance's request. A critical part of the containment strategy involves placing any potential SCP-8480-1 instance in a controlled, traumatic scenario post-identification, without the awareness of the subject or their guardians. Should symptoms escalate after the induced trauma, the individual is immediately transferred to Foundation custody. Strictly, Foundation staff are prohibited from offering counseling, support, or any mental health treatments to SCP-8480-1 instances. Furthermore, these instances are not discouraged from engaging in maladaptive auto-cannibalism, as this behavior has shown to deter the progression to Stage 4. Consequently, SCP-8480-1 instances require minimal sustenance, only needing food and water once a month, and are kept in solitary confinement continuously. SCP-8480-A, identified for aggressive immediate measures, is to be neutralized upon detection, with remains to be sent back to Site-80-P for detailed analysis and further study.
The gleaming steel scissors glide effortlessly through the sheet of red material, slicing through as if nothing was there. The blood-red fabric parts to either side. A pair of hands pick up one of the pieces and hold it up into the air. The man admires his handiwork before draping the cloth on a dress form and pinning it in place. Although there are many tables in the large room with sewing machines and mannequins next to them, they're all empty. The man works all alone in the big room. And it is impossible not to notice that he's an incredibly handsome man, too. So good-looking that no matter your preferences, you can't help but stop and take notice of his perfect facial features, his slim, fit physique, his lithe, dexterous hands. He brushes a strand of dirty blonde hair away from his vibrant blue eyes and takes a pin out of his mouth before adjusting the fabric just a millimeter more before sticking it in place. The man steps away from the dress form and admires his work. There. Absolutely perfect. There's no doubt that this will be the closing look of the upcoming fashion show. Another masterpiece. Just like him. But that doesn't mean that he's finished. There's still much to be done, and he goes back to work at his table, sewing bits of fabric together to create embellishments for the opulent couture gown. He's so focused on his new design that he doesn't notice the fashion house's operating manager in the hall outside of the workroom. The manager points through the glass window in the door and tells the two police officers with him that this is the man they're looking for. There's been a number of tragic and mysterious crimes involving people connected to this fashion company, and the police have finally closed in on a suspect. Well, not the police exactly, but two SCP Foundation agents posing as police officers. The Foundation became suspicious after learning that there had been several missing persons, murders, and mental breakdowns, all of which involved people connected to this one company. And even more specifically, they were all connected to one man. There was plenty of evidence that something more than just regular criminal activity was happening here. Something strange was happening. Something anomalous. One of the police officers nods at his partner before gesturing for the manager to leave. It's always better not to have civilians present during a containment. The incredibly handsome man still hasn't noticed his guests in the hall, remaining completely absorbed in his work, and he doesn't even look up when the two agents burst into the room, both with guns drawn, not taking any chances. "Freeze! Drop your weapon!" one of the agents shouts, but the beautiful man doesn't respond and just continues snipping away at fabric with his scissors. "I said freeze!" he commands again, and this time, the handsome man at least appears to have heard them, finally stopping his work. He slowly looks up with his piercing eyes to gaze at the men who have intruded into his creative workspace. "Drop your weapon now," the agent tells him. The man looks over at his hand, which still holds the large pair of scissors, and smiles. He gently places the scissors down on the table, careful not to let them touch the expensive cloth that is rolled out before him. "Now put your hands up!" This time, there's no response, and the man grips the edge of the table, smiling, and stares into the eyes of the agents, first one, then the other. "Hands up or we'll be forced to shoot!" The smile slowly leaves the handsome man's face. "Will you excuse me for one moment?" he says, though with no hint in his voice that it's actually a request. The agents seem unsure of what to do. Both of them appear taken aback and confused by his nonchalant attitude. The handsome man turns away from the agents and quickly steps behind a dressing screen that's been set up near his work table. As he walks behind it, he doesn't break his stride at all. He simply passes behind the screen for mere seconds and steps out on the other side. Only once he steps out, it isn't him anymore. The man that emerges from behind the screen is a completely different person. Where once he was slim, graceful, clean-shaven, and dressed in a fine suit, now he is heavy and muscled, like a professional football player, with a thick beard and dressed as if he's a member of a SWAT team. Before the agents can even react to the bizarre metamorphosis, the large man charges them and begins attacking. He snaps the neck of one and plunges the scissors he snatched off the table into the other's neck. More SCP containment specialists, these ones dressed in tactical gear with no attempt made to disguise themselves as everyday police, flood into the room and open fire. But the man who looks like a Navy SEAL picks up the fallen agent's guns and begins firing both at the same time. He outguns and outmaneuvers the agents, effortlessly rolling behind cover while constantly firing, taking out agent after agent. Screams fill the air, both from the dying SCP agents as well as the civilians who are struck through the walls by the onslaught, including the manager, who had snuck back to the door window to watch what he thought would be the snobby, handsome man being taken into custody. The window behind the Special Ops soldier explodes, and 2 SCP agents rappel through, catching him by surprise and knocking him to the ground. It takes even more agents rushing in to hold the man down as he struggles and screams like a wild animal, breaking one of their jaws for good measure before they're finally able to subdue him and confine him with heavy-duty straps. When all is said and done, 17 agents and 10 civilians have lost their lives, but the anomaly has finally been contained. Once it is taken to a secured location, it is given a new designation, SCP-056, but the site staff soon give it a new nickname, calling it simply a beautiful person. SCP-056 is one of the most deceptive and one of the most dangerous anomalies known to the SCP Foundation. It is a being whose size, gender, and appearance can all vary in an instant, and which will change in response to its environment. The form it has most commonly taken while in containment resembles a man who appears to be in his mid-20s. His exact looks will vary slightly, but he will always be what could be described as incredibly handsome, at least by traditional societal standards. His clothes will change as well to be a style similar to those of other people around him, though they will always be of a higher quality and more aesthetically pleasing than anyone nearby is wearing. While that appears to be SCP-056's preferred form, it's far from its only one. In addition to the young man, it has also been observed taking on the appearance of several others, including a woman with a striking resemblance to Hollywood actress Scarlett Johansson, a form it took when walking past a group of a younger female staff, a male bodybuilder who could bench press over 250 kilograms, which was 30 kilograms more than the strongest security guard stationed at the Foundation site. It took the form of a female doctor who was measured as having an IQ score 30 points higher than any on-site researchers, as well as non-human forms, like a large, well-groomed Labrador retriever when it was exposed to another researcher's dog, and an extremely aesthetically pleasing couch when left alone in its own containment chamber. These changes from one form to another occur whenever people lose focus on the subject, something that seems to happen when new people are exposed to SCP-056. And once they lose focus, it's able to change in appearance virtually instantaneously. Attempts to film the transformation have resulted in the recording equipment exhibiting the same effect, seemingly losing focus, and being unable to see exactly what happens when SCP-056 changes from one form to another. Its clothing will change along with its bodily form, though so far it hasn't been observed manifesting weapons or other tools. Great efforts have been made to determine SCP-056's original form, though so far, these have all been met with failure. When placed within an empty concrete cell and placed under constant video surveillance, the cameras experienced the same loss of focus that others did, and then were met with a rather surprising figure left in the room. SCP-056 had taken the form of a video camera, similar to the one being used to record it, though a slightly more advanced and expensive model. Additional attempts were made to discover its true form, this time without direct observation equipment, with researchers instead making use of passive scans that could detect changes to life forms. When they left SCP-056 alone and monitored it using these tools, what they found was nothing. There was no detectable body temperature, heartbeat, or even weight. It appeared that when not observed, SCP-056 simply ceased to be. Those who have personal contact with SCP-056 often report that the anomalous entity makes them feel substandard or jealous, as if they can't measure up to it. yet at the same time will seem to seek its approval. This extends to SCP security staff, who will express a desire to follow its commands, while researchers will try to argue with it, something that usually results in them leaving its containment cell feeling as though they were outwitted by its intelligence. And SCP-056's expert communication abilities seem not to be limited by complex subjects or language barriers. Research has shown it to be fluent in at least 200 different dialects, and it has exhibited an expert level of knowledge in such varied topics as fashion, automobiles, theoretical science, sports, and a multitude of others, all of which it will usually show a greater knowledge of than the person it is conversing with. And despite leaving the conversations feeling dejected about their own abilities, those who talk to it will almost always express a desire to speak with SCP-056 again, as if they can't resist being made to feel inadequate by it. A number of tests were then performed to discover just what form SCP-056 would take when presented with various situations, and the results were rather interesting. In the first, a male Class D personnel was given a knife and told to try and attack SCP-056. 056 quickly took the form of a young, fit man who was able to effortlessly disarm the attacking D-Class and killed him with the knife instead. In another test, a female D-Class entered its cell not with a weapon, but with a bottle of expensive wine. They were met with SCP-056 in the form of a young, beautiful woman who accepted the wine, but upon trying it, spit it out in the D-Class's face and sent them away. Next, researchers sent 2 D-Classes in at the same time, one male and one female, with no specific orders at all. SCP-056 appeared as a beautiful woman in a well-tailored business suit, who proceeded to examine both the D-Classes, pointing out their each and every physical flaw before sending them 2 on their way. Researchers then tried sending 10 Class D personnel into the cell, all of whom were male and who had expressed a romantic preference for females. SCP-056 appeared as an especially beautiful female in a low-cut red dress. 056 didn't interact with the group in any way, but after 10 minutes, the D-Classes began to look uncomfortable. Soon, an all-out brawl broke out between the D-Classes as they violently assaulted each other, apparently for SCP-056's approval. 056 seemed to watch the melee with pleasure for several minutes before calling an end to it and sending them all out. A member of staff then volunteered to be tested with SCP-056, a Level 4 personnel who was regarded as being especially beautiful herself. She entered SCP-056's cell, where the anomaly took the form of a similarly beautiful, professional-looking woman, and the 2 proceeded to have a conversation, discussing various advanced personnel management techniques. The discussion seemed amiable, but after 90 minutes, the staff member appeared to become infuriated with SCP-056 and quickly left the room. While no cross-tests with other SCPs have yet to be performed, when asked about other anomalies, SCP-056 shows a rare instance of vulnerability, expressing hatred towards them, and even occasionally, fear. SCP-056 has been relatively benign in its time in SCP containment, seemingly content to spend its time around Foundation staff. It's been allowed to have a cell of its own choosing, as well as pick its own furnishings, which have tended towards expensive and fashionable decor. Security staff assigned to guard it are equipped with high-powered tranquilizers, and any staff that exhibit mental irregularities after extended exposure to SCP-056 must undergo immediate psychological examination. It has frequently asked for access to the internet, and when asked why it desires that, SCP-056 responded that the Foundation was unable to provide it with enough sycophants, and that it wanted the whole world to know its face. Needless to say, its request for internet access was denied, and the anomaly, which has been classified as Euclid, continues to be securely cut off from the general public and remains in Foundation containment.
Honestly, no. It doesn't feel like anything is working, the woman tells the man who is seated across the room from her. She's been coming to see him for several months now, but she doesn't feel like she's made progress on any of her issues. The man listens and nods as he jots down some notes on his pad of paper. He has something he wants to discuss with her. She may feel as though she's run out of options, but there is one other thing they could try. He's seen lots of success using this with his other patients, though it's a technique that many would deem to be rather unconventional. The woman is unsure. Unconventional techniques don't exactly instill her with confidence. But at this point, what did she have to lose? The man stands up and motions for the woman to follow him. He leads her out of his office to a section of his practice that she's never seen before, where they stop in front of a closed door. On the door is a window covered by a curtain, and she notices that there are a set of strong locks as well. He unlocks the door and ushers her inside, where she finds that it is a small room, maybe 10 feet across at most, with thick padding on the floor and walls, and bright white lights set into the ceiling. He tells her to wait there just a moment and to make herself comfortable before he excuses himself. The woman looks around at the padded room, wondering just what it is that she's agreed to. The man returns, and now he's holding something. A garment bag. He unzips it to reveal a dark piece of clothing inside, but when he takes it out, she sees now that it isn't clothing at all, at least not any normal kind. It's a straitjacket. The woman is scared, unsure if she wants to go through with this, and he does his best to put her at ease. If she's uncomfortable, she certainly doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to, but he reiterates that he has had great results using this with some of his other patients. It's been something of a miracle cure. Well, no, cure is the wrong word. He corrects himself and explains that this won't cure her in the way that she's probably thinking, but rather what he's found is that this therapy is able to provide a momentary relief from symptoms, a chance to see what life is like without being plagued by the issues that have led her to seek his help. Once she has gotten a glimpse at what life is like without these burdens, they can work towards bringing her back to that point through other therapies and techniques. This might be just the breakthrough she needs to finally make something work. The woman is still skeptical, but she is desperate to find anything that will help her escape the thoughts constantly plaguing her mind so that she can get back to being the person she wants to be. And after a moment of thought, she agrees to go through with the procedure. The therapist tells the woman to hold her arms out in front of her and places the straitjacket on her. She can see and feel now that it is made of black leather, and it fits her perfectly, almost as if it were made just for her. She turns around, and he pulls the straps tight before fastening them in place. The woman, standing in the small padded room and fully constrained by the black leather straitjacket, turns to the man and asks, "Now what?" "Now we wait," he tells her, before backing out of the room. "A warning, though." "Now a warning?" she says. "This is a one-off procedure. You can only do it once," he tells her before closing the door. She's confused. Is this the procedure? He's locking her in a cell? What is going on? She never should have agreed to this. Her mind starts to race, filling with bad thoughts, and they get even worse when the lights suddenly go out. She starts to panic, breathing heavily in the dark from both fear and from being constricted by the leather straitjacket. She calls out that she has changed her mind. She doesn't want to do this after all. No response. She's serious. She wants to end this right now and leave the room. It isn't working. It's actually making her feel worse. All the fears and anxieties that plague nearly every moment of her life come rushing in at once. Her mind races as she can feel all the telltale signs of a panic attack starting, a million little issues pulling her apart at the seams, leaving her stretched out and helpless to do anything to stop it. But then suddenly, there's a change. Like a cool breeze blowing across her face, the feelings of hopelessness and despair start to dissipate. Her anxieties feel as though they were melting away into the dark, leaving her with only the comforting embrace of the straitjacket. It isn't that she feels happy necessarily. She simply feels normal, content with herself and her situation. It's an incredible feeling, and she basks in the joy of not feeling bad. She doesn't know how long she's in the dark room feeling content. Minutes, maybe hours. But eventually the door opens and the lights come on. Her session is over. She leaves the office with a new perspective on life. Most of the feelings of satisfaction have gone away already, but still she feels renewed, ready to tackle her issues so she can feel what she felt in the straitjacket again, so she can feel normal. By the next day, though, her new lease on life is completely gone, and she's on the phone with the man pleading with him to let her come in immediately and wear the straitjacket again. He warned her, though, that it was a one-off procedure. Too much exposure is dangerous. She needs to focus on other treatments instead. The woman only wants to come wear it for a little bit, though, just a few minutes to feel that way again. He tells her it's impossible, though. She should be happy it was so successful and move on to new techniques. And besides, he's leaving for a conference and won't be back for a week. They can discuss things again when he gets back. It's raining that night as a figure in a dark coat breaks the glass on the front door and reaches through to unlock the door. The woman enters the office and hangs her wet jacket on the wall. Her flashlight illuminates the room they have their sessions in. No one is there. She walks deeper into the building and spots the door to the padded room. She passes by and goes even further to a back room that she's never been in before. In the room, against a wall, is a metal trunk. She opens it to find the dark garment bag with the leather straitjacket inside. "What do you want me to do again?" the young man asks. He was just supposed to be delivering a pizza, and his boss would be angry to learn that he allowed a customer to invite him in. "This is my office," she tells him, "and I'm working on some new techniques for my patients, but I need to try them out myself first. That makes sense, right?" "Well, sure, I guess," he responds. "But for this particular one, I need some help. It's a secret, though, so I can't get any of my colleagues to help me. But you can help me, right?" The young man nervously swallows the soda she's given him and nods in agreement. She explains that all he has to do is help her tighten the straitjacket, close the door, turn off the lights, and listen. In a little while, when she's finished, she'll ask him to come inside and take it off her. That's it. The young man still seems a little wary of the request. "What happened to your door?" he asks, but she ignores his question and pushes a wad of cash into his hand. The young man shuts the door to the padded cell, and a moment later, the lights go out. The woman is almost immediately taken back to the same mental place she was before. All of the thoughts that constantly repeat in her mind, the ones that she's never able to turn off, suddenly go quiet. She sighs with relief in her dark, safe space. But then, she feels something. Not in her mind, but on her face. A twitch, just a little facial spasm. But then another. There's something wrong. Her face suddenly feels very tight, like it's being stretched. Her eyes grow wide. Her mouth pulls into an unintentional sneer. The young man hears the woman's muffled cries from inside the room and opens the door, but what he sees causes him to emit his own scream before he turns and runs out of the office into the stormy night. "What the heck?" the man thinks as he looks at the broken window on his office door. He enters to see that the door is still unlocked and that there's glass on the floor inside. He walks inside his office and looks around and doesn't see anything. But in an instant, there's a moment of realization. He runs to the back, to the door to the padded cell. The door to the room is ajar, and he listens. Is that breathing inside? He opens the door to the dark cell and turns on the light. The black leather straitjacket is sitting in the middle of the floor, except it isn't the floor anymore. Now, instead, a stretched layer of skin is spread across the padded room, with the outline of flattened bones visible underneath. The man's mind can't comprehend what it is that he's looking at, but then he sees it. In the far corner of the room is the stretched-out face of the woman, her eyelids pulled too tight to blink, leaving her eyes staring up at him. Through a stretched, contorted mouth, she whispers, "Help me." Is there anything crueler than an object that is able to treat your mental health issues, yet has some of the most devastating side effects imaginable? In this humble doctor's opinion, no. And today's anomaly is just such an object. Designated SCP-482, it is perhaps better known as the mentally mutating straitjacket. SCP-482 is a black leather straitjacket that is quite similar in appearance and construction to a mass-produced version, though as you'll see, it is completely unique. Although the straitjacket is comparable in size to other medium-sized versions, it is somehow able to fit virtually any and all body types and sizes. A tag inside contains the words, "Made in Xiaoyan, hand wash only, no acerahena powder," in faded text, though neither the city nor acerahena powder appear to exist in any records that the SCP Foundation has been able to locate. There are no signs of wear on SCP-482, but there are several cuts on the straps that cinch the garment closed, and testing has shown that it is able to be further damaged, though any additional investigations of the extent to which it can be damaged have been suspended due to the lack of viable duplicates. The real anomalous effects of SCP-482 occur when the straitjacket is worn, and the two main effects, which occur one after the other, have been designated as time point alpha and time point beta. Time point alpha is used to refer to the initial stage of a subject wearing SCP-482 and can last a varied period of time, though it is most often between 1 and 6 hours of wear. During this period, the subject will report feeling mentally better, and any negative mental afflictions that they suffer from or are forced to deal with will appear to disappear completely. Additionally, any medications that they may be on will have their effects negated entirely, leading to them returning a result on Foundation standard psychological tests that is consistent with a baseline mentally stable individual. The effects of time point alpha are temporary, and once the subject is separated from SCP-482, any mental illnesses they are living with will be seen to return, but they will disappear once more if the straitjacket is worn again. However, the amount of time a subject spends experiencing the effects of time point alpha are cumulative, and given enough time inside of the straitjacket, they will always eventually reach the second stage of SCP-482. Time point beta refers to the subsequent time period that passes if a subject is still wearing SCP-482 once time point alpha lapses. During this period, the changes to the subject will no longer be mental, and instead, they will begin to experience physical effects. The exact nature of the physical changes will vary, though they do seem to be related in some way to the subject's own mental health issue, with the degree of the change also seemingly related to the severity of their issue. Through the testing of SCP-482 by Foundation researchers on D-Class personnel, a number of different manifestations of the Straitjacket's anomalous effects have been documented, and they're recorded in a file designated Experiment Log SCP-482. In the first test, a male D-Class diagnosed with schizophrenia was placed inside of the leather straitjacket. He immediately reported feeling eerily calm, and he was observed to simply sit and stare at the wall with a blank expression for 2 hours and 49 minutes, a period which was later determined to be his time point alpha. Time point beta began 1 minute later at 2 hours and 50 minutes when the subject's body began to contort, and he remarked that he was in a great deal of pain. Various parts of the subject's body began to increase in mass and size, including his head, as his eyes began to bulge out. He called in agony while attempting to make eye contact with the researchers who were observing through a glass viewing window for 34 minutes until a termination order was given. Subsequent examination of the subject's body revealed that his body mass had increased by roughly 180% due to rapid bone and muscle growth. It's unclear what physical process caused this, though genetic tests showed that his DNA had abnormally shortened telomere strands. The observers also reported they experienced an unnatural feeling that rendered them unable to move in a normal manner while the subject was making eye contact with them. For the second test, another male D-Class, though one who had been diagnosed with a paranoid personality disorder, was placed in the straitjacket. During his alpha exposure, he reported a satisfying quiet in his head, with none of the disembodied voices that normally plagued his thoughts speaking to him. He still appeared content after 2 hours and was taken out of the suit, though after requesting to be placed back inside, he was allowed to return to wearing SCP-482. After an additional 1 hour and 30 minutes, though, the beta exposure began. Visible bulges appeared on his neck and shoulders, and after 4 minutes, he began screaming for someone to stop talking and get out of his head. More bulges appeared on his body, and audio recording equipment in the room picked up mysterious sounds that analysis has revealed to have been as many as 7 distinct voices speaking in an unknown language. The termination order was issued 25 minutes later, and a later autopsy revealed that each bulge actually contained a fully formed mouth and voice box. Observing researchers also reported that during the test, they had seen flashes of movement in their peripheral vision, and subsequent review of the taped footage revealed small shadows appearing and disappearing in the room throughout the test. Next up was a female D-Class who had been diagnosed with hyperphagia, which is a disorder that can cause an extreme increase in appetite and can remove the ability to satiate one's hunger. Upon being placed in SCP-482, she remarked that, "For the first time ever, I am actually full." She felt this way for 1 hour and 58 minutes, after which she began to feel a pain in her abdomen. The D-Class fell into the fetal position as the pain increased, and her limbs were observed to begin retracting into her body, accompanied by loud snapping sounds as presumably the bones started to crack and break. "Oh God, it's eating me! Oh God, it hurts!" she cried out, and a termination order was immediately issued. The autopsy that followed revealed that the woman's body had somehow formed a second digestive system that had begun to consume her own body mass, and if left unchecked, would have eventually digested it in its entirety. Following this test, the observing researchers reported that they were unable to satisfy their own hunger cravings with normal amounts of food, and several of them actually had to be restrained by security staff in the on-site cafeteria. Luckily, these urges appeared to fade after several days. In the final test, a D-Class personnel with pyromania was placed in SCP-482. Despite the impulse control disorder normally causing them to start fires whenever given the chance, they now ignored all of the flammable materials offered to them by researchers. After 1 hour and 33 minutes, though, thermometers in the testing room noted a sudden sharp rise in temperature. This was followed by a powerful explosion of heat and flames when the D-Class spontaneously ignited. The testing room was completely destroyed, and nearby hallway A13 suffered catastrophic damage. All observing researchers were also lost in the conflagration. SCP-482, though, survived. Surprisingly, the body of the D-Class was also able to be recovered, and though the autopsy was made difficult due to the heat it still exuded, a discovery was made. Inside the body, a new organ was found, one that appeared to be sustaining some type of constant reaction that produced heat, as well as strong magnetic waves, and this organ has been placed in containment for future study. SCP-482 is currently being kept in a containment locker at a secure site, with access restricted to Level 2 personnel and above. The maximum time allowed for testing is 1 hour after mutations manifest, and any test subjects who reach time point beta are to be terminated. Following termination, SCP-482 is to be removed from their body prior to autopsy. The straitjacket is then to be thermally cleansed and all biological traces of the prior subject removed before it is used for testing again. Now I bet you are telling yourself, well, this sounds pretty easy to contain. I bet this is a safe class anomaly. And normally, I would agree with you. But perhaps you noticed something strange in the experiment log. Did you pay attention to the reports from observing researchers that they too had begun to experience some rather unusual effects simply from watching SCP-482 affect a subject? Did it seem to you as though the mentally mutating straitjacket was somehow projecting the mental illnesses experienced by the subjects onto those observing it? It appears that there may be more to SCP-482 than first meets the eye, and this mystery only deepens when one reads the containment procedures on this anomaly's file and realizes that the person overseeing SCP-482 research is none other than SCP Foundation legend, Dr. Bright. Is the actual testing of SCP-482 not actually taking place on the D-Class personnel, but on the SCP Foundation researchers? A convoluted experiment designed to discover the true extent of its anomalous effects. When it comes to this Euclid-class anomaly, only Dr. Bright knows for sure.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a work night, and the last of the bar hoppers and clubgoers have long since turned in. At the end of the street, the last bar is finally closing down for the night. Or it would, except that the bartender is having trouble getting rid of a customer. Sitting at the bar, an old derelict is demanding yet another drink. The bartender grumbles in annoyance. This derelict is sloppy drunk, and the bartender just wants to go home. "Closing time," growls the bartender. "Just one more," protests the derelict, shaking his empty glass for emphasis. "I've got money." He laughs at his own words, his giggles ending with a loud belch that blows a cloud of aromatic vapor into the bartender's face. That's it. This derelict has been hanging out at this bar causing trouble all night, and the bartender has had enough. "Get out of here," says the bartender as he hustles the wobbling derelict out the door. "You're done." The derelict creaks and totters as he stumbles out into the street. The night's festivities are really hitting him. It isn't so often that he's got the money to burn, but when he does, he likes to spend it here. The prices are right, and the conversation is minimal, which is just the way that he likes it. The derelict turns around, fire in his eyes. He's raring to fight, and he doesn't care that the bartender is quite a bit larger than he is. Right now, all he can see is red. "Don't tell me when I've had enough," he slurs, raising his fists as he prepares to lash out. But the bartender has already slammed the door in his face. Defeated, the derelict turns his back on the closed bar and starts a slow stumble down the street. "Stupid bartender," mutters the derelict, turning up his collar against the cold bite of the night air. He wishes that he just had one more drink to warm his stomach against the chill. He's so out of it that he doesn't stop to think that the bartender did him a favor by refusing to fight. There is no way that the derelict would have won that battle. Even if he was in his physical prime, even if the bartender wasn't twice his size, the derelict is in no shape to fight. His vision is blurry and his head is swimming. In fact, he can barely remain upright. If he had any sense, he would probably stumble home and sleep this off. But the night is young, and he's not ready to give up yet. He walks down the street, eyeing every storefront in hopes of finding another bar. Unfortunately, every window has a closed sign in it. He swears under his breath. What a run of bad luck. What's a guy supposed to do in this town, he wonders. Just when he's about to give up hope, he spies something glinting in the reflective halo of a street lamp. He stumbles closer to get a better look, and he can hardly believe his eyes. Finally, his luck is changing. Someone has abandoned a half-empty bottle. "Well, hello there, old friend," says the derelict. He struggles to focus, but the world is spinning. In his confusion, he could swear he's seeing things. But no, he can feel the heft of the glass bottle in his hand, and he knows that it is as real as he is. "Who left you behind? Who would leave a perfectly good bottle just sitting out here?" He recognizes this brand. There's only about 3 fingers of liquid left, but that's better than nothing. Some people might balk at drinking out of a random bottle that you found on the street, but the derelict doesn't give it a second thought. He tips the bottle back and slurps it all down. It burns going down, just as it should, he thinks. He sighs in contentment as he feels the harsh liquid warm his stomach. Perfect. That really hit the spot. But what happens next surprises him so much that he can't believe his eyes. There's still liquid in the bottle. He blinks, wondering if maybe his adult brain is playing tricks on him, but he shakes the bottle cautiously, and is rewarded with a telltale swish of liquid. That's no illusion. He takes another swig, guzzling it down. Normally, he'd drop the bottle to the ground and stumble on, but something makes him pause. He maintains his grip on the bottleneck and raises it again to take another look. And sure enough, there's still more left in the bottle. The derelict cannot believe his luck. He feels like he must have won the lottery. He's found a never-ending bottle. Already his mind is reeling with possibilities. That bartender really thinks he's so smart, he mutters to himself as he weaves unsteadily. But I don't need him anymore. See if I ever go to this stupid bar again. He just lost his best customer. Now that I have you, little bottle, I don't ever need to pay for drinks ever again. It's the best day of my life, crows the derelict, raising his arms in triumph. He's barely able to stagger back to his home, a seedy apartment on the bad side of town, before he passes out on the floor. The morning sun rouses the slumbering derelict, and he rises with a groan. His whole body aches, and his mouth feels dry and parched. That's par for the course after a night of drinking. But somehow this hangover feels different. He puts that thought out of his mind as his mind returns to the strange, never-empty bottle that he discovered the night before. It's lying on its side on the floor next to him. He reaches for the mysterious bottle, only to find that, in fact, the previous night was not a dream. The bottle still contains just as much as it did the night before. He can't explain it, but the derelict isn't about to question his good fortune. He lifts himself to his feet and walks slowly into the bathroom. He's feeling a hangover like he's never felt before. His head is pounding and his throat is dry. His tongue feels swollen and sluggish inside his mouth, but he knows how to handle it. A little hair of the dog is all you need to help with the hangover. He takes another gulp from his bottle, but this time it brings little relief. And he notices something else strange too. It's his scalp. The skin on his head has started to itch, and he can't stop scratching. He feels like he's got the world's worst dandruff problem. He should probably take a shower, he thinks. He strips down and steps into the tub, turning the hot water on full blast and letting it wash over him. The shower only brings him temporary relief. Afterward, as he dries himself off, the towels feel rough and abrasive against his skin. His skin comes off in big, flaky patches, and his nails leave red trails in their wake. What's that? Is that blood? He examines his fingers to see that his nails have grown into ragged, claw-like talons. With a frightened yelp, he bites them off. It's easy to do. Although they look formidable, his fingernails are weak and brittle, almost as if he's dealing with a sudden calcium deficiency. What could be wrong with him? He remembers all the warnings he heard back in school when they used to march everyone into assembly to listen to lectures from the local police. At the time, he scoffed at the long lists of scary-sounding consequences of a lifetime of drinking, but now, he's not so sure. It's probably nothing, he says as he examines himself in the bathroom mirror. His skin looks blotchy and infected. It doesn't take long before his hair and nails are out of control. His hair grows down to his shoulders, but comes out in big, ragged clumps if he runs his fingers through it. His claw-like fingernails are constantly breaking and cracking until his fingertips are bloody, and his quick is itchy and infected. If his habits had left him looking worse for wear before, he really looks awful now. For the next week, he barely leaves the apartment. He pulls the curtains and keeps the lights off, afraid that someone might see him. When the landlord bangs on the door, shouting that rent is late and demanding that the derelict hand over the money, he doesn't answer. He waits. The landlord gives up for now. That's good, thinks the derelict. It will give him time to think, time to figure out what to do about his disease. He knows that something is not right. Many of the local bartenders are, by now, probably wondering where he's gone. It's not like the derelict to stay away. He's practically kept the bar industry in this town afloat all by himself. It must be something major indeed to keep him away from his favorite poison. Luckily, he still has the bottomless bottle to comfort him during this trying time. The derelict is certain that he's caught some bad bug, but he thinks that he can wait it out. All he needs to do is make it through the next week, and everything will be fine. Sipping free drinks helps him to pass the time in a pleasant stupor as he waits for his health to return. Unfortunately, things are only going to get worse for him. His hair and fingernails keep growing, to the point that he has trouble lifting the bottle without his twisted nails getting in the way. His dry, flaky skin is changing as well, becoming thick and leathery and hanging off him in great folds like the hide of an elephant or a rhinoceros. His skin continues to grow, until the folds flop over his knees and gradually hang lower and lower until they touch the ground. Moving is harder now that he's carrying so much extra weight. He thought at first he just had a nasty bug, but he's clearly picked up some weird skin condition, and even this derelict, sodded as he might be, suspects exactly where he got it.
It's got to be that crazy bottomless bottle. He can't think of another reason. Even so, he can't bring himself to part with this little gift from heaven. Even in his darkest hour, a few sips of liquid courage always helps to calm his nerves. He considers lumbering down to the free clinic in hopes that they might be able to cure him or at least tell him what's wrong with his skin. But he thinks better of this option. What if he's got some weird alien parasite that no one has ever seen before? They might lock him away in some government lab or something. No, he reasons, it's better to wait it out. He'll sleep it off, swear off the sauce for a little while, and maybe it'll pass. In desperation, the derelict drags himself across the floor, hoping to at least find some solace away from human contact. He locks himself into his bedroom while he's still able to manipulate the lock on his door. The extra folds of skin are hanging off of his hands and arms, making it hard to do anything. The extra skin is so heavy that he can't walk much carrying all that extra weight. He lies on the floor of his bedroom, away from everything, and hopes that tomorrow, when he wakes up, this will just be a fading dream. The only thing that brings him solace is the never-ending bottle, which, even now in his advanced state of decay, he keeps close by him. After all, he reasons, the damage is already done. What could possibly be the harm in enjoying a nice drink? A week later, his condition has not passed. The landlord is back, and this time he's not taking no for an answer. The landlord isn't supposed to enter his tenant's apartment without permission, but he doesn't care. He uses his own key to unlock the door and go inside. The condition of the apartment is appalling. The furniture is broken, the floor is covered with unidentifiable filth, and there's a rotten stench in the air. The landlord wants to throw up as the full weight of the musty smell hits him in the face. It's as if someone has been living in here without any ventilation, with all the windows firmly closed and sealed. A sudden noise from the bathroom draws his attention. Of course, thinks the landlord, that old bum is hiding in there. He thinks I won't find him. The landlord steals his resolve and heads towards the bathroom, determined to get the money that he feels is owed to him. But what greets him when he steps through the door isn't the derelict anymore. It isn't even human. The creature in the bathroom is a massive pile of ambulatory skin folds. The skin flaps have grown so large and cumbersome that the derelict within can barely move. They sprout all over his body, covering him so that he looks more like some kind of alien sea cucumber now than any human. The landlord stumbles backwards, screaming in terror at the sight, unable to comprehend what he's looking at. Improbably, the creature reacts to the noise, and a ripple of movement spreads across its surface. It starts to move, despite not having any legs. The landlord is so terrified that he doesn't notice the glass bottle that suddenly drops from between the creature's skin folds as it starts to move toward him. The same bottle, still with 3 fingers of liquid inside. How could something like this happen? What parasite or disease did the derelict contract from the miracle bottle he found? Sadly, this never-ending bottle isn't a boon, but a curse, and the man who found it that night became just another victim of what the SCP Foundation has classified as SCP-420. SCP-420 looks like a perfectly ordinary bottle of a certain popular libation, even to the point that it bears the label of a common brand. The bottle always contains a small amount of a mysterious liquid known as SCP-420-1. If this liquid is poured out, SCP-420 will always replenish itself. When SCP-420-1 is potent, it is physically, chemically, and molecularly indistinguishable from ordinary whiskey, although drinking will have an effect far greater than even the strongest liquor. When SCP-420-1 is poured out of SCP-420, though, it undergoes a strange transformation, eventually losing its potency and changing until it is indistinguishable physically, chemically, or molecularly from urine. Consuming potent SCP-420-1 instigates a bizarre physical transformation called SCP-420-2 in 6 stages. In Stage 1, beginning 12 hours after consumption, the subject will start to have difficulty speaking, resulting in slurred speech that is not consistent with normal alcohol inebriation. Their fingernails, toenails, and hair will start to grow at an accelerated rate, but also become brittle and prone to breakage. Nail breakage to the quick often leads to bleeding and infection. The Foundation has had some success in curing SCP-420-2 if it is caught when still in Stage 1, treating it as if it is an aggressive form of cancer with radiation and chemotherapy, as well as a constant intravenous supply of Formula 420A09T-T174B. Victims thus treated have a 73% recovery rate, but a 21% fatality rate. From Phase 2 onward, this protocol can slow the spread of SCP-420-2, but will not stop it entirely. In Stage 2, beginning 1 to 2 weeks after Stage 1, the subject's skin begins to show similar properties to those exhibited by hair and fingernails in Stage 1, becoming dry, brittle, and prone to cracking. As old skin flakes off, the subject's new skin begins to grow at an accelerated rate, eventually forming thick, leathery folds all over the subject's body. Skin flaps growing inside the mouth interfere with speech and eventually render subjects mute, but do not appear to impede breathing or eating. Indeed, subjects in Stage 2 exhibit a renewed interest in eating, possibly because the subject's body requires additional nutrients and calories to build the increasingly heavy armor of thickened, calloused skin. Stage 2 subjects will eat anything that they can get their hands on, and many die after attempting to eat poisonous or inedible objects. In Stage 3, beginning 3 to 6 weeks after Stage 2, nerves in the skin layer grow uncontrollably, but no longer connect to the victim's central nervous system. Genetic testing of the skin in this stage reveals that its DNA has become so mutated that it can no longer be classified as human. It is, in fact, a separate and very inhuman organism that almost acts as a parasite growing from the human host. The skin may develop tumor-like growths, which appear to be analogous to human muscle and secretory cells. Hair and fingernails sprout randomly from the mass of skin. By Stage 4, beginning 3 to 7 days after Stage 3, the skin has become a mass of thick, leathery folds, completely covering the human host to the point that they disappear completely. The skin begins to exhibit random twitching movements, as though it is indeed a living organism finally coming into its own as a life form and testing out its new body. The human subject within the skin continues to eat, although brain scans reveal that they are no longer in control of their mouth. Instead, the skin entity forces the mouth to move by moving the attached skin. Small holes begin to form in the skin, eventually growing into narrow tunnels or throats that lead back to the now trapped body of the helpless subject. The subject is still consumed with a ravenous hunger and will eat anything that they can get in their mouth. In Stage 5, beginning 1 to 2 days after Stage 4, the skin begins to move in patterns indicating rudimentary intelligence. The skin, although still attached to the original subject, is now completely and distinctly non-human. It is its own organism. It can move of its own accord, dragging the trapped host along for the ride, and it moves and feeds much in the manner of an extremely large amoeba. It feeds by excreting a digestive enzyme onto foodstuffs and then enveloping the nutrients with its skin folds, again like an amoeba surrounding its food. The food is taken into the throats. These tunnels connecting the outside of the skin to the now completely subsumed host are now directly connected to the host's circulatory system and function as additional mouths. They can consume nutrients which are moved down their length by bristly hairs and further broken down by grinding keratinous plates before being taken into the host's body. Most hosts will remain in Stage 5 indefinitely, although there still remains a much more dangerous Stage 6 yet to come. At this time, it's unknown what factor triggers SCP-420-2 to develop into Stage 6. Little information about Stage 6 is available at this time, although it is known that it involves even more accelerated skin and keratin growth, resulting in a sudden increase in size and mass. Perhaps the most terrifying part of the entire transformation is that the host remains alive for the duration of the process, and sometimes even after SCP-420-2 has settled comfortably into its new life at Stage 5. Mercifully, most hosts will have completely succumbed to insanity by this point, although some are shown by brain scans to still be self-aware and quite calm, perhaps fading into a Zen-like state as they accept the inevitability of their fate. SCP-420 is contained in a storage locker at an undisclosed site maintained by the Foundation, and it is only to be removed from this locker by SCP staff with Level 3 clearance or higher. It has been given the Safe class because, despite the horrifying nature of its effects, at least it doesn't move anywhere. Samples of SCP-420-1 not in use by testing should be stored in the container marked SCP-420-1 Decon in Locker 1014-420 until they lose potency, at which time they can be disposed of as biohazardous liquid waste. Victims infected with SCP-420-2 are not contagious and should be contained in standard solitary D-Class secure confinement. On reaching Phase 3, subjects should receive double rations. Due to the extreme danger of Phase 6, any subjects who reach Phase 4 should be closely monitored for signs that the condition may be advancing further, in which case they are to be immediately destroyed by incineration. Knowing the fate that befalls victims of SCP-420 should make anyone think twice about drinking out of a random bottle that you just found in the street, though personally, I think that's just common sense. I hope you enjoyed this anomaly, which was recommended by DrBob Squad researcher Lawman23. The group of children on their bikes stare intently at the large, abandoned house. Rumors have been circulating all school year about a monster that lives inside. One child tells the others about the kid from a couple towns over who went inside and never came back out, and it's easy to believe that something evil could be lurking inside the rundown home with its peeling paint and many broken windows. The children begin teasing each other, daring one another to go in and see the monster for themselves. No one seems especially eager to volunteer, though, as they all egg each other on. As the group of children joke about who should be forced to go inside, another comes riding up behind them, struggling to catch his breath. "You left me behind again," he complains. Clearly, this is not the first time that this smallest child of the group has been made to try and keep up with his bigger and faster friends. The bigger kids all turn to look at him. They don't need to discuss it any further. The answer to who must go inside has already been decided. The smaller child tries to protest, but ultimately, what decision does he have but to go inside? He can't let everyone else think that he's a chicken. He's got to prove once and for all that he's just as tough as any of them. Without another word, he lets his bike fall into the dirt and makes his way towards the big, creepy house. The door pushes open without any resistance, and the boy looks into the dark house. The boy steps inside, and the floorboards creak loudly under his feet. The inside looks much like the outside, old, worn, and abandoned. But then, he hears something, a scratching noise coming from above him. He turns to leave, but he can see all of his friends through the doorway, and they motion for him to keep going. The boy steels his nerves and turns back. He's going to show them just how brave he is. The boy starts up the stairs, each one groaning as he steps onto it. He reaches the top of the stairs to find a landing with more rooms, each full of dirt and debris. There's spray paint on many of the walls and lots of trash. It looks like teens may use this as a place to hang out. But there at the other side of the landing is one more room, and the door is shut. From outside, the group of children can see through the upper windows as the boy makes his way through the house. They're not laughing and teasing any longer. In fact, they're impressed by how bravely he is exploring the old home. Though none of them would admit it out loud, he's earning their respect. The boy reaches the shut door at the end of the hall and presses his ear to it, but he doesn't hear anything inside. He places his hand on the doorknob and slowly opens it. The boy screams and falls backwards as the cat that was hiding inside panics and jumps through one of the open windows. The boy can't help but laugh. Of course it was just a... The boy screams again as the floor gives way beneath him and he crashes down onto the first floor in a pile of debris. He's stunned by the fall before starting to scream again as that floor gives way too. His yelling is silenced by the air being knocked out of him as he hits the basement floor. He's covered in dust and pieces of 2 floors he fell through. He feels bruised and sore, but he can wiggle his fingers and toes. He's not paralyzed, and it doesn't even feel like he's broken a bone. Maybe he's okay. But no, he's definitely not okay. Because suddenly, there's something picking him up off the floor. As his eyes adjust to the dark basement, he sees what it is that's holding him. It's half man, half machine, a huge, disgusting mix of metal and flesh. The boy is too scared to scream anymore as the creature's unmoving, dead-looking eyes stare straight into his. Its face looks as though the skin has been stretched across a human metallic skull. The boy can only watch as the monster raises its sharp, metallic fingers and brushes the dirt out of the boy's hair. The boy starts to whimper, but whatever this thing is, it doesn't seem to want to hurt him. A tinny, robotic voice coming from a small device on the creature's face suddenly breaks the silence. Al anta ala mayuram. The boy doesn't understand, but the robotic man tilts his horrific head to the side and repeats the same thing. The boy is still confused, but he feels like the robot is trying to tell him something. He somehow gets the sense that it's not going to hurt him. Is this the monster that everyone has been afraid of? A misunderstood machine man living down here in the basement? The robot flinches as something is smashed on the back of his head. He tosses the boy to the side and turns to see the boy's friends, each of them armed with pieces of wood and other scraps as weapons. They've come here to save their friend from the monster that they dared him to find. Another runs up to strike the robot, but before he can reach him, he falls to his knees in pain, as do the rest of the children. The creature has begun emitting a high-frequency noise, and the children try to cover their ears. They all feel a searing pain that makes it feel as though their heads will explode. The piercing noise continues to ring out, but the monster looks like it has entered some kind of dormant state and is no longer moving. The small boy is able to slowly get back to his knees, hands still clasped to the side of his head, and stand up. He runs past the monster and his friends who are writhing on the floor in pain, up the stairs and out of the old house. A woman stands at a kitchen counter. chopping vegetables for their dinner that evening, and talking to her oldest daughter about her plans for that weekend, when the back door suddenly bursts open. Standing there is her son, the small boy. He's barely able to whisper the words, "Monster. There's a monster in the basement," before he collapses, blood pouring from his ears and nose, before he begins convulsing on the floor. At the local police station, an officer is speaking on the phone. "I see. Yes, that is quite strange. A metal man? You don't say. I'll send someone out there right away. Don't go anywhere." The police officer hangs up the phone and looks around, making sure no one is nearby or listening to him, and then takes out his cell phone. He dials a number from memory, and someone answers on the other end almost immediately. "Yes, this is Field Agent Patch," the police officer says. "You need to get a containment team out here right away, and a good one too. I don't know what it is, but it's dangerous." An SCP Foundation mobile task force that specializes in containing dangerous humanoid threats soon arrived at the house and took the anomaly into captivity. Misinformation teams concocted a cover story about a gas leak leading to the unfortunate deaths of several of the town's children and administering amnestics to any potential witnesses. Once the messy business of containment was over, though, it was time to figure out just what this strange creature was. SCP-203 appears to have at one time been a Caucasian human male, though its appearance now is far different than it once was. This bipedal humanoid creature stands 2.5 meters tall and weighs roughly 200 kilograms. Both its incredible height and weight are due to the fact that the man's original skeleton has been entirely removed and replaced with a mechanical framework made of cast iron. The metal skeleton is much larger than the original bones, and in many places SCP-203's skin has split from being stretched over it, revealing the mechanical structure underneath. Other parts of the framework appear to have been intentionally made to protrude through the skin, though it is unclear for what purpose. In addition to this larger-than-normal mechanical skeleton, a number of other augmentations are present on SCP-203. Its fingers have been extended into sharpened, hook-like barbs that are approximately 1 meter long. Its lips have been removed entirely, making it clear that there is no movable jawbone, and that the skull is likely one large hollow piece of metal, and there are several more hook-like protrusions jutting out around the mouth area, smaller but similar in appearance to the fingers. SCP-203's legs have been modified as well, with 2 added joints that give them an appearance more akin to a dog's, and its toes have been removed and replaced with a solid piece of metal similar to those found in steel-toed boots. Its chest has no sternum or breastplate, which causes the skin stretched across to pull inward as its diaphragm contracts. Its ears have also been removed, though it still seems to possess hearing that is far beyond that of an average human. And while its eyes still remain, they are held in a permanently forward-facing position by several needles that emerge from the eye sockets. The irises also appear permanently dilated and do not react to light. In place of a mouth is a small speaker covered by a metal grate that is capable of producing basic vocalizations, though with a distinctly robotic sound to them. Tests have shown that SCP-203 has a basic understanding of English, but its own primary language seems to be a type of Arabic, though there are no records of the exact dialect. SCP-203 does not need to eat or drink, and without any visible mouth, it is likely incapable of either. Instead, it runs off of a power cell located within its body that will provide energy for up to 72 hours. After those 3 days, SCP-203 will shut down and enter a hibernation state for 3 to 4 hours, during which its power source will recharge, providing it with another 72 hours of energy. All attempts to examine SCP-203 by either X-ray, CT, ultrasound, and other forms of diagnostic imagery have failed, and attempts at exploratory surgery have triggered its defense mechanisms, which are both painful and deadly. When it perceives that it is being threatened in some way, SCP-203 is capable of emitting a high-frequency droning sound that has a profoundly damaging effect on the human nervous system. The effects of this defense mechanism were able to be observed directly when a D-Class personnel accidentally struck SCP-203 and its droning sound was activated. Immediately after being exposed to the sound, D-104 experienced a severe headache. After 15 minutes, the headache grew worse, and D-104 began to bleed from the ears. After a half hour, the D-Class, who had now gone to the infirmary, began to experience seizures and was bleeding from all of his orifices. 10 minutes later, the D-Class was dead. Another test was performed, and the results were nearly identical, with symptoms progressing at roughly the same rate. However, this time, rather than move the D-Class to the infirmary, it was kept in the cell with SCP-203. After 40 minutes, the D-Class was dead, and a few minutes later, 203 finally ceased its droning sound. SCP-203 then approached the body of the deceased D-Class and began to use its own augmentations to start removing the skeleton of the D-Class. While SCP-203 was stopped before it could complete its task, it now appears that the droning sound it produces is a defense mechanism, but may also be a part of the process by which it creates new instances of SCP-203. In interviews with SCP-203, it claims to have no memories of its life prior to its augmentation. It says that it now exists in a near constant state of pain and confusion, and that the times when its battery is expended and it enters a rest state are its only escape from the pain of its existence. It also claims that it has no memory of what happens once its defense mechanism is activated, nor does it remember what it did to the body of the D-Class that was left in its cell. However, it is unknown just how truthful SCP-203 is being. There has been no way to verify anything that SCP-203 tells researchers, and for the time being, its statements are to be regarded by Foundation staff as an attempt to elicit sympathy or otherwise manipulate them emotionally. It's made several requests for pain-killing medication and anesthetics, but so far, all of these requests have been denied. SCP-203 has been classified as Euclid, and it is kept in a specialized storage bunker at a research site. 2 D-Class personnel equipped with sound filtering equipment guard it at all times, and it is accompanied by an armed escort to any testing or research sessions. Is SCP-203 the ultimate victim? A normal human that was transformed against his will into a crude amalgamation of man and machine? Maybe there is something more to SCP-203, or rather, less. Is SCP-203 fooling all of us? Is this tortured iron soul nothing more than a metallic monster disguising itself with the skin of its last victim? Perhaps with more research, we will one day know the answer.
The crowbar, bearing a bloody handprint, clatters to the soft earth below. Not long ago, this same crowbar had been striking against the side of an unassuming house, but it would not get the chance to unleash another blow. The 2 vandals, wielding a spray can and a hammer, respectively, stare on in horror at the terrible fate befalling their friend. The 3rd vandal, who had been holding the crowbar until moments ago, is seizing and spasming, his feet suspended a foot above the ground. A large, organic tendril is impaling him through the chest, rendering him a human shish kebab, his shirt soaking through with blood. The tendril is emerging like some organic appendage from the outer wall of a nearby home, the ultimate security system. But the horror isn't over. As though in a nightmare, they find themselves frozen to the floor. But it isn't just fear. They look down and see that roots are growing up through their shoes, up through their feet. They are quite literally rooted to the floor. But this is nothing compared to what's happening to their skewered friend. But before we go any further, I have a question for you. Are you feeling like something's off? Is something getting in the way of your happiness or your goals? You don't need a clinical mental health issue to benefit from therapy. Sometimes life's challenges are enough. Therapy gives you tools to approach life differently, and it's a sign of strength to seek help when you need it. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make starting therapy easier by making it more affordable and more accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a questionnaire, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a couple days. If your therapist doesn't feel like the right fit, you can switch anytime at no additional cost. BetterHelp makes it easy. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5-star rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. If you're struggling, consider therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/drbob to get 10% off your first month. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. As I was saying about the friend who was literally skewered by a mysterious tendril, he is rotting, decomposing at impossible speeds. The tendril impaling the decomposing vandal recedes into the wall, taking the vandal with it, absorbing him. As the vandal is absorbed, the cracks he'd made in the wall with his crowbar seem to repair themselves like a healing wound. His matter, perhaps even his very soul, has become one with the village that he had once aimed to desecrate. The vandals had never expected the village to fight back. With the former crowbar wielder dispatched, the village turns its attention to the other 2 vandals. The one holding the spray paint can is the first one to go. The ground puckers around his feet, the roots gripping tight and dragging him into the earth like quicksand. He screams for his friend to help him, but the dirt soon chokes out his words. Even if the only surviving vandal wasn't also rooted to the floor, there was nothing he could have done to save his rapidly sinking friend. As the spray can vandal is consumed by the earth, the vandal with the hammer feels a surge of adrenaline coursing through his vital systems. With tremendous force, ignoring the terrible pain it causes him, he yanks his feet away from the roots, some roots being pulled from the earth, others yanked out of his feet. His shoes filling with blood, he turns and runs towards the edge of the village. Even though he's lost his friends, if he gets out, he can tell people, he can stop all this. But he doesn't count on the houses around him, developing another modification. Strange, organic sphincters that spit out small bone-like darts at high speeds, sticking into the vandal's back. Some unknowable chemical leaches from the darts into the vandal's muscles, paralyzing him. He collapses to the ground, foaming at the mouth, as another long tendril reaches out, grabs him by his wounded feet, and drags him back to the village. There's a price that needs to be paid. Since its discovery, the SCP Foundation has assigned the designation of SCP-1135 to an anomaly located in an unnamed village in India. Any name historically associated with the isolated village, as well as its exact location, have been stricken from all public records and redacted even within the Foundation's own database. All previous residents living within the area prior to its acquisition by the Foundation have since been expelled from the area, relocated, and rehomed, as well as provided with sufficient doses of amnestics to prevent knowledge about SCP-1135 reaching the public. The area surrounding SCP-1135 is noted as having a few irregularities for a village in this particular region of India. The houses of the village are built around a Hindu temple, as well as local places of commerce. However, researchers have noted the usual structure of the buildings as being inconsistent with other Indian architecture. For one, the roads leading into and through the village, and for 2 kilometers around it, are fully paved with asphalt concrete. In addition, the houses are much larger than those found elsewhere in the region, and show signs of being constructed using far more technologically advanced methods and materials than are seen even in neighboring townships. Each building in the vicinity of SCP-1135 is furnished with running hot and cold water, working electricity, and sewerage, all of which are considered uncommon in the area. Though the Foundation has conducted extensive research in and around the village, personnel have been unable to determine exactly how the electricity is able to reach these buildings. There is no functional infrastructure, as is seen in places that are provided power via electrical grids, nor is there any form of rudimentary system in the area generating electricity. Researchers have been unable to locate any form of generator that could be powering the village's homes, and it has been surmised that they instead receive electricity as a direct result of SCP-1135's anomalous properties. After conducting further investigations into the structure of the buildings in the area, Foundation personnel have discovered that the materials used in construction are not only unique to the village, but are also seemingly organic in nature. Each structure in the area affected by SCP-1135 is made from what appear to be strands of organic fiber that run through each and every building. In fact, and of the permanent fixtures within the village, excluding anything brought in and placed by the Foundation, consists of these same fibers. These strands never affect nor threaten the structural integrity of any of the buildings and extend into the ground for about 3 meters down, like the roots of a plant. Extensive spectral analysis and excavation of selected areas surrounding SCP-1135 have unearthed that these organic fibers are connected, forming a network underneath the village itself. They're able to grow and perform self-repair at an impressive rate, as well as absorbing nutrients from the soil, again functioning as the roots of many flowers and trees would. You see, SCP-1135 isn't a village. It's just something that looks like it. Something alive. SCP-1135 is one big living organism. This has led to those working among the research team to colloquially refer to the anomaly as the Living Village. Researchers have noted that SCP-1135 shares similarities with certain strains of fungi, albeit much larger and seeming to not require the same low-light conditions that many fungi thrive in. The fibers that SCP-1135 consists of have been seen during testing, generating a wide variety of organic and non-organic materials around themselves. This, according to Foundation researchers, has been what has allowed the fibers to form the structures found within the village, as almost a form of active camouflage. A research assistant working on site even likened it to the defense mechanisms of certain insects, such as stick bugs or Caligo urolacus, commonly known as the owl butterfly, for the distinctive markings on its wings that resemble the face of an owl in order to ward off predators. However, one anomalous entomology expert assigned to SCP-1135 took particular offense to this observation, expressing incredulity at the notion that a creature would disguise itself as a village in order to hide itself. This was already known to have drawn human beings into the area, as SCP-1135 had even been an active community prior to the village being acquired by the Foundation. The entomologist, in a fit of rage, hurled obscenities at the research assistant and forbade him from ever speaking again. The fibers that SCP-1135 consists of are known to be able to repair themselves, and can thus repair the structures found within the village. Periodically, new instances of these organically grown buildings will start to emerge from the soil, maintaining their structural integrity at all times during this process. Thanks to the use of hydrochloric acid to prevent expansion of the affected area, SCP-1135 remains confined within the perimeter established by the SCP Foundation. As what seems to be a direct result, when space is limited, older structures within the village will appear to collapse and disintegrate before making way for new ones to grow in their place. When this occurs, the fibers within these older structures atrophy as the building, for lack of a better term, dies. In order to survive, like all living organisms, SCP-1135 requires some form of sustenance. Initially, the research team stationed there assumed that this was done entirely by the fibers absorbing water and nutrients from the soil. However, this alone is not a substantive enough food source to allow SCP-1135 to continue living. The anomaly's main source of sustenance wasn't initially discovered until an incident involving the aforementioned research assistant and anomalous entomology expert. Clearly still highly offended by the research assistant's statement about SCP-1135's camouflage, the entomologist took a jeep down one of the asphalt roads leading out of and away from the village. Unbeknownst to the rest of the research team, the entomologist followed the road to its end, arriving at some isolated scrublands, an area that stays dry and hot during the summer months, but avoids becoming a desert in the winter thanks to cooler, wetter weather. While alone in the area, the anomalous entomology expert overheard a sound, almost like a sizzling noise. Identifying it quickly, he recognized it as the warning sound produced by a certain variety of snake as a warning to ward off threats. He investigated further and encountered a wild echis, known locally as the saw-scaled viper or the carpet viper. Aware that these were venomous and responsible for causing the most snakebite-related deaths in the world, the entomologist was able to capture and secure the wild snake, an action he would later describe as being not very well thought out. Returning to the living village, it had already gotten dark by the time the entomologist arrived back at the Foundation's field headquarters with the saw-scaled viper in tow. The rest of the research team had retired to their quarters for the evening, and were all asleep. Under the cover of darkness, the entomologist released the captured saw-scaled viper into the research assistant's bunk as the man slept, as retribution for his earlier statement. Surely enough, the saw-scaled viper bit the sleeping research assistant and injected him with a lethal dose of its venom, killing him. In a panic, the severity of his actions setting in, the entomologist hurriedly dragged the assistant's body to the outskirts of the village and hid it in one of the buildings. The next morning, it didn't take long for the remainder of the researchers to notice their assistant was missing. While nobody suspected foul play, a sweep of the area was conducted and the research assistant's body was discovered, or rather, what was left of it was. Seemingly overnight, the body had decomposed at an extremely accelerated rate, almost withered beyond all recognition, as if it had been drained. The deterioration of the body, strangely, had produced no noticeable odor, as the breakdown of gases involved in human decomposition usually do, leading a portion of the research team to examine the remains closer. Through doing so, they discovered how SCP-1135 feeds. The fibers from the building the research assistant's body had been left in had latched onto the corpse and were using the dead tissue, cells, and other organic matter as a source of sustenance. It turned out that in addition to pulling water and nutrients from the soil, any biological waste left in the boundaries of the village became a food source for the living village itself. This applied to any variety of waste present in the area. It was because of this, one researcher realized, that nobody had seen any animal carcasses or excrement anywhere within the village. SCP-1135 had been absorbing and eating it, as it was now doing to the research assistant's body. Upon hearing not only that the dead research assistant had been found, but that his remains were being decomposed and consumed by SCP-1135, the entomologist vomited, waste that was also absorbed by the living village, and later confessed to the murder. He was placed on probation and given a 2-year ban from fieldwork, including expeditions to anomalous areas. Initially concerned that they would be next on the organism's menu, the surviving remainder of the research team investigated SCP-1135's consumption process further. Testing themselves for any potential deficiencies or unnoticed losses of tissue, they found no sign that the organism had been secretly using them as food too. It seemed to only affect dead organic tissue, or anything that was no longer serving a biological use to anyone within the living village. All the waste matter in the area was decomposed quickly, with no telling signs like smells, and typically left little trace afterwards. Researchers concluded that the organism later converted this waste into nutrients for itself through some unknown anomalous process. What they were unable to determine was how SCP-1135 was able to differentiate between waste matter and other still living matter. The first suggestion to the research team that the living village wasn't quite so similar to an organism like a plant as first thought, but could potentially possess some form of sentience or even intelligence. It was then noted that certain structures within the boundaries of the village that began to disintegrate usually did so if SCP-1135 had gone a significant amount of time without feeding. It was able to use the buildings constructed from its own fibers as an alternative food source. Inversely, as was seen after the living village ate what was left of the research assistant, consuming a larger amount of waste triggered the growth of new buildings, or the evolution of improvements in existing ones. Noticing the rapid growths of new buildings post-feeding, members of the research team proposed a series of invasive tests to the affected area of SCP-1135. They'd seen the living village deconstruct its own mass for use as food, and wanted to determine how the anomalous organism would react when the fibrous structures were damaged by external factors. Based on the way the fibers had behaved so far, it seemed to be a logical assumption that any damage inflicted to buildings within the living village would just regenerate. However, the way in which the organism responded to the research team's experiments was far from being so predictable. Inflicting minor damage to any of the living village's structures was, as had been anticipated, soon corrected by the fibers. However, repeated or substantial enough damage caused the anomalous organism to create new constructs with its fibers, in the form of elaborate traps that it used to injure, drive away, or in extreme cases, kill its attackers. Multiple members of the research team examining SCP-1135's defensive responses suddenly found themselves tumbling into pitfalls that seemed to form right under their feet in seconds. Others weren't so lucky. During an experiment that involved striking at one of the SCP-1135's buildings with a sledgehammer, the researcher wielding said implement was witnessed suddenly stopping mid-swing of the hammer. Upon closer inspection, it appeared his heart had been pierced by a number of spiked caltrops that had burst out of the wall and impaled his body as he struck at the organic fibrous building. Attempts were made to treat his injuries, however, the trauma to his major arteries was too severe. Before the rest of the research team could begin to start making preparations for a burial, SCP-1135 had already started its process of decomposing and consuming his body, identifying it as more waste to be broken down for nutrients. Thanks to an autopsy conducted by researchers on site, the caltrops and other deadly contraptions made by SCP-1135 to deter attackers were determined to be far more complex than any other naturally evolved defense mechanism. Far from possessing poison to kill predators or camouflage to hide from them, more and more of the research team began to suspect that SCP-1135 possessed some form of intelligence. The traps it could make were the kind that would take a human with a high degree of intelligence and skill to make. Further examination determined that if they remained untampered with, traps produced by the organic fibers of SCP-1135 would disintegrate within a time frame of between 20 and 30 days, unless being triggered. Unless damaged repeatedly or substantially enough, however, SCP-1135 displayed no active hostility towards human life. On one occasion, During preparations for confining SCP-1135 to the area within the security fence, a measure of diluted hydrochloric acid was accidentally spilled on one of the structures, causing a temporary panic among researchers that the living village would retaliate with more traps. However, again signaling a degree of intelligence, the organism seemed to be capable of differentiating between damage that was caused indirectly and intentionally, as well as damage inflicted by living organisms or by other natural forces. While all of the findings of the research team have heavily suggested that SCP-1135 possesses a degree of human-like intelligence, this remains unproven. Discovery of SCP-1135 had taken place some undisclosed date prior to the Foundation's arrival in the area. A reporter who had been investigating aid efforts in the region of India where SCP-1135 is situated overheard rumors from local residents that described a place where buildings had seemed to grow overnight. Various interviews with eyewitnesses pointed the reporter to the living village, wherein a small population had gathered and were now living. Before information about SCP-1135 was able to be made public, operatives working for the Foundation intervened and were able to keep the village's discovery a classified secret. When conducting their intervention at SCP-1135, the Foundation's operatives conducted interviews with local residents who reported that the village had possessed anomalous properties for only a few years. The reporter, who had been detained for further questioning by the Foundation, had been following a story relating to a sustainable housing development scheme that had been conducted in the area. According to the information unearthed by the reporter, this scheme had been responsible for the creation of SCP-1135 and had been conducted by an organization known as the Mana Charitable Foundation. However, as far as the SCP Foundation were able to ascertain, there existed no such charitable organization, and any attempt to identify people involved in the scheme were unsuccessful. Unbeknownst to the SCP Foundation, the Mana Charitable Foundation was far from a fictitious organization. Although their existence has been kept from the Foundation through cognito-hazardous means, the truth is that the Mana Charitable Foundation is a non-profit and non-government organization that intends to use anomalies in order to provide humanitarian aid and emergency relief to various underdeveloped areas around the world. As the largest international paranormal charity in existence, Mana Charitable Foundation has been responsible for the creation of numerous useful SCPs that have been contained by the Foundation, SCP-1135 being among them. One strange occurrence was recorded some time after the Foundation acquired control of the area. This took place during one of the routine observational checks carried out by research teams. A number of the Living Village's buildings had grown what appeared to be security cameras on their outer walls, and in certain indoor areas as well. These cameras have been observed watching the waste disposal teams as they move through the village to deposit SCP-1135's food. Beyond tracking their movements, the cameras have done little to disturb Foundation personnel inside SCP-1135. Requests to dismantle and examine the internal workings of these cameras are currently pending approval from Site-43's administrator, Dr. Regal. Every 3 days, a research team assigned to SCP-1135 will perform a series of checks of the area within the security fence. All research personnel on site are reassured that they are not to take any precautions that would otherwise be necessary for entering a hostile environment. Researchers are dissuaded from carrying weapons on their person while checking the area within the security fence. However, they are required to be in possession of a two-way radio communicator at all times. Additionally, each member of Foundation staff is advised to maintain constant visual contact with another fellow researcher, just in case the Living Village feels like having a late-night snack.
High in the Andes Mountains, two miners chip away at the rock with their mining picks in search of precious minerals when something strange happens. They hit an impenetrable wall. As they dust off the unbreakable surface they've reached, they see that it's a mirrored sheet of some strange metal. They start to break away the rock around it, revealing more and more of the shiny metallic surface, until it suddenly disappears as if by magic. Behind it is a chamber with strange machinery and a mysterious metallic ball inside. The two miners look at each other in disbelief. What on earth had they just discovered? Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-163, also known as an old castaway. The Foundation soon caught word of the bizarre object that had been unearthed in the Andes Mountains, and immediately sent agents to secure the site. When they arrived, they found the metallic sphere was still there, though approximately 30% of the machinery originally reported to have been in the chamber had been looted before they could get there.
Based on analysis of the rock strata in which it was found, the chamber appeared to be many, many years old, and tests on the minerals present showed signs of a shock wave, indicating that whatever this was, it had crash-landed into the mountains. Upon examination of the metallic sphere, the agents found that it was a kind of machine, and one with a relatively simplistic interface. The agents deactivated the machine and were met with an amazing discovery. The mirrored ball was actually a kind of shield, and inside was something incredible, a creature that could only be described as extraterrestrial, and it was soon to be designated SCP-163. The alien immediately lashed out at the agents, but they were able to subdue it and transport it back to a Foundation containment site for further investigation. SCP-163 is like nothing that has ever been seen on this planet. It stands 2 meters tall and is 1.5 meters wide. Its body is roughly cylindrical, with a circular mouth on its lower body and something that resembles a head on top. It has 8 legs, each with 3 joints that are arranged radially around the middle of its body. It also has multiple specialized limbs, including 2 prehensile apparatus on either side of its mouth to assist with feeding, 2 arms just below the head area that are capable of finer movement and the delicate manipulation of objects, 2 larger arms just above its legs that are used for the manipulation of heavy objects, as well as self-defense, and the remains of 2 appendages also near the mouth that appear to have been amputated at some point prior to its discovery. 30 centimeters from the top of SCP-163's head is a single semi-compound eye, which wraps all the way around its head, giving it complete 360-degree vision. The eye is separated into 88 separate units and is sensitive to ultraviolet C light, a short wavelength light that's harmful to most life on Earth. Its skin is transparent when exposed to the wavelengths of light that humans can see, but turns opaque under ultraviolet light. The strange properties of SCP-163 don't stop with what's on the outside. Tests of the creature's green-colored blood have revealed that it processes oxygen and carbon dioxide similar to many creatures on Earth, but its circulatory system is nickel-based, as opposed to the iron or copper-based systems used by most terrestrial organisms. It also has an endoskeleton composed of tissue that's similar to cellulose, the substance that plant cell walls are made of. And its cells use DNA for instructions just like human cells do, with the same ACGT bases, but SCP-163 interprets those instructions differently from the way human cells do. All of these differences mean that SCP-163's home environment must be radically different from Earth's, with different types of proportions of elements present. Certain elements that are perfectly safe for humans are dangerous to SCP-163, and vice versa. Tests have shown that while it's able to survive in our atmosphere unaided, it will begin to show signs of illness after 1 hour. In order to stay alive, it's vital that SCP-163 continues to possess and maintain the universal life support device that was discovered with it, designated SCP-163-1. The device is able to convert basic chemical elements into subsistence for 163, as well as projecting the protective metallic shield that it was found encased in. The other technology recovered from alongside SCP-163 has yet to be fully understood, though research is ongoing. The technology is surprisingly low-tech, with much of it consisting of transistors assembled into analog computers, with seemingly varied purposes. The processes these computers appear to be modeling do not match up with any known scientific processes, and it's theorized that they have something to do with 163's life support. It's still not known how or if it communicates complex ideas. When in certain states, it produces a steady sinusoidal wave at approximately 15 Hz that can last anywhere from 15 seconds to 10 minutes, and personnel that have been exposed to the sound have reported experiencing feelings of paranoia and are recommended to remain in well-lit conditions until the feeling subsides. SCP-163's main way of expressing emotion appears to be with the lump of tissue above its compound eye, and depending on how it feels, it will furrow its brow in a number of different ways. It has also been shown to display a positive response to something by rapidly beating its delicate upper arms together, and a negative response by doing the same with its 2 powerful lower arms. SCP-163 is to be contained in an enclosure with rooms for living, dining, work, and sleep, as well as a receiving room with an airlock and seating that's appropriate for both 163 and a human researcher.
The air in the enclosure is to be filtered and regularly checked for impurities, and there are 2 lighting systems, one that produces light within the human visible spectrum, and one producing ultraviolet light. Personnel are to wear isolation suits at all times when in the enclosure, to protect both themselves and SCP-163 from cross-contamination. Surprisingly, SCP-163, which has been classified as safe, is also free to leave its enclosure, provided it don its own isolation suit first, and is escorted by a researcher at all times. A number of experiments have been performed in an attempt to communicate with SCP-163, as well as determine its level of intelligence. In one test, a number of cards with images printed on them that depicted various human expressions and emotions were shown to 163. It did not appear to recognize any of them, but it did hold the 18th image shown up over the presiding researcher's faceplate. In another, it was given a test to see whether it was capable of selflessness and would offer help if given the chance. A researcher brought 2 wooden blocks and a box into 163's enclosure. The researcher opened the box and placed 1 block inside before closing the box. The researcher then tried to place the other block inside the box, acting as if they were struggling and couldn't figure out why the block wouldn't go inside the closed box. After watching for 10 seconds, SCP-163 assisted the researcher and opened the box, a result consistent with how human children behave when given the same test. But the most unexpected result of all came when a researcher brought a canvas, brushes, and a selection of ultraviolet-colored paints to 163's enclosure. 163 immediately began painting after being shown how, and soon produced a painting of an alien landscape with never-before-seen plants and animals. SCP-163 stared at the painting it had produced for 7 minutes before seeming to become angry, knocking the painting to the floor and retreating to a corner of its room. It furrowed the tissue on its head, indicating distress, and all attempts at communicating with it failed. That is, until the researcher tried to remove the painting supplies, at which point SCP-163 beat its heavy arms together to indicate its unhappiness. The next day, the researcher brought more painting supplies, and SCP-163 continues to paint imagery of what is presumably its home alien planet. It's truly amazing and lucky that SCP-163 was discovered. The Foundation is now monitoring all excavations of rock strata that are of similar age to the one 163 was discovered in. Perhaps one day another extraterrestrial will be discovered, offering 163 potentially a way home, or, at the very least, a friend.
A worker presses down on the plunger, and moments later, a huge explosion rocks the quarry. When the dust clears, the 3 quarry workers look on at the pile of rocks that they'll now spend the next days and weeks hauling out. But then, they spot something strange. There in the newly exposed rock face is an opening. The 3 men stand at the mouth of the previously hidden cave. They poke their heads inside, but it's too dark to see much of anything, except for the fact that the tunnel in the rock stretches on for at least a few meters before it turns and prevents them from seeing any further. One of the quarry workers slaps his coworker on the back and dares him to go inside and check it out. "No way," he tells him as he pulls his hand back from feeling inside the cave wall, his palm now coated in a sickly slime. "It's gross in there." The other 2 laugh at him. If they think they're so brave, why don't the 2 of them go check it out? The 2 men stop laughing and look at each other. Who could have ever foreseen the tables turning on them like this? But they're not going to back down. One of the 2 takes out a flashlight, and they step into the cave while the 3rd waits outside. He watches as the 2 of them head deeper into the cave, disappearing behind the bend. Inside the cave, the floor is just like the walls, coated with some kind of substance making it wet, but also a little sticky. They half expected the cave to end right around the bend, but now they can see that it continues on. Not only is there another turn several meters ahead of them, but as they head deeper in, they find that there are branching paths too. This might just be the start of a vast cave system. There's no telling how far or how deep it might go. They better head back to the entrance before they get lost. The 2 turn around to start heading back towards the entrance. But wait, what was that? They spin around. It sounded like there was a noise behind them, but there's nothing there, just the empty passageway. They must be hearing things. They really should get out of here quickly, though. Come on, let's go. As they turn to leave, though, something happens. With a sickening squishing sound, the walls of the tunnel constrict, closing up between them. He runs towards the now closed passage and starts slapping at the moist, soft wall, but there's no response.
But then he does hear something. Was that a scream? He's realized something else, too. Even though his friend had the flashlight, he can still see. While faint, the walls themselves seem to be producing a small amount of light. He yells out that he's going to get help and that his friend should hold tight and not move. He'll get him out of there. He has no idea if he can hear him, though. He starts to slowly make his way back the way he thinks they came, but the cave feels different. He's taking turns that he doesn't remember making on their short trip. He should be at the entrance already, and there seem to be more branching paths than there were before. It's hard to tell in the low light, though. Maybe he's just confused. He's hearing noises, too. Wet, writhing sounds. He's got to get out of here. The quarry worker reaches a fork in the tunnel and has no idea which is the right way to go. He doesn't remember this at all. He calls down the tunnel, but there's no answer to his cries. He hears more of those wet, slapping sounds behind him, though. He's got to keep moving. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. The left tunnel it is. He goes down his chosen path, rounds a corner, and sees another fork. What is going on here? He's got to pick, though. Eeny, meeny, miny. He screams as something leaps out of the tunnel at him. Outside the cave, the quarry worker is growing nervous. He's gotten a flashlight of his own and shines it down the tunnel, but he can't see any more than they could before. He calls out, asking if they're all right, but he's met only with silence. He turns around behind him at the empty quarry. They're the only ones working on the site that day, and if they don't get back to work soon, there's going to be some angry questions about why they spent the day horsing around inside of a cave. As much as he hates the idea, he's got to go in there and get them out. He enters the cave and goes around the first bend. He too notices how oddly sticky and slimy every surface is, but he has to press on. Maybe they were hurt and needed his help. He rounds another bend and spots something, a pair of legs sticking out from around the next turn. His friend must really have been hurt. He runs towards his injured coworker and kneels down next to him. It looks like he's passed out on the ground, and he tries to shake him awake. "Are you okay? What happened?" His friend moans a bit, but doesn't even open his eyes. He moans again, and this time blood starts pouring out of his mouth. The quarry worker steps back, scared at the sight of his friend's state. That's when he notices something. His friend's stomach. It's moving. He leans in close. He can see bumps swelling and moving around his abdomen. Is that? The SCP Foundation soon learned of the troubling reports and moved quickly to purchase the quarry and the surrounding lands. Those who had seen or heard rumors about the missing workers were amnesticized, and all further access to the area around the quarry was strictly controlled. The cave itself that had been unearthed was designated SCP-2385, but the Foundation needed to learn just what they were dealing with. So after a research outpost was constructed over the entrance, the investigation into what was happening inside this strange anomalous cavern system could finally begin. The first to enter the cave is D-11424, a Class D personnel, who is equipped with a shoulder-mounted camera, a Ruger LC-9 pistol, a machete, and 1 week's worth of rations, since it was unknown just how vast this cave system may be. D-11424 proceeds into the cave and immediately reports back the same conditions that the workers had experienced, that the surfaces of the cave were soft, wet, and a little sticky, and also that they seemed to have an almost imperceptible glow. D-11424 moves deeper into the cave, but sees no sign of the missing workers, despite one of their bodies having been reported as being lost relatively close to the entrance. He's ordered to continue deeper into the cave, and radios back that the walls weren't stable. He would pass by openings in the walls that would seal off once he was past. On more than one occasion, he saw new passages open up as well, and these didn't appear to be caused by collapses or other geological activity. The walls seemed like they were alive. But the walls were the only sign of life he could find. There was still no evidence of the missing workers or whatever might have gotten them. But then, after D-11424 rounds a corner, he sees that something is up ahead of him. It's not one of the workers. It's a creature, and one that looks like nothing he has ever seen before. The thing crawling on the floor of the cave looks like a giant worm, several feet in length, but with a grotesque, skinless human head. D-11424, frightened at the sight of this grotesque creature, turns to run, but it's too late. The worm has spotted him and charges at him immediately, slithering across the wet cave floor at an incredible speed.
D11424 slips and falls to the ground, his shoulder-mounted camera knocked off his body and left facing a wall, leaving the researchers monitoring the feed with nothing except the sound of his screams. Once contact was lost with the Class D personnel, the Foundation decided that due to the presence of hostile creatures within the cave system, that the next exploratory expedition would be undertaken without humans. The mission was authorized, and 2 months later, a remote-controlled drone designated A47 was sent into the cave. Just like D11424 and the quarry workers before saw, its camera captures passageways opening and closing in the living rock walls. As it progresses deeper, it eventually spots the same worm-like creatures with horrible human faces that look like they've had their skin removed, which have now been designated by the Foundation as SCP-2385-1 entities. And A47 soon discovers a surprising fact about these bizarre organisms. They appear that they are being birthed right from the walls of the cave itself. As A47 enters one of those largest rooms yet seen in the cave, its camera captures over a dozen 2385-1s growing out of the walls and ceiling in various stages of maturity. Some of them snap at A47 as it passes by, trying to attack the drone, but luckily they're unable to reach. There's larger examples of the worms in the room too, and these ones also differ in appearance slightly, with a fibrous growth over their eyes. The researchers assume that these entities are different enough from the smaller versions that they warrant their own classification, and are designated as SCP-2385-2 entities. Luckily for A47, these larger specimens, which can be as large as 4 meters in length, seem much more docile than their smaller counterparts and ignore A47 as it passes by. A47 then learns another shocking piece of information about these disturbing worm-like creatures. They're cannibalistic. Its camera relays footage back to the research team of a 2385-1 entity feeding on another, smaller one. It appears that they eat their prey whole after unhinging their grotesque jaws. The one feeding tries to lash out at A47 with its tail, but can't reach him with half of another instance in its mouth, and the drone continues deeper into the cave. Just when A47 enters the next chamber, a 2385-1 instance growing out of the ceiling drops down right in front of it, leaving no way for the drone to get around it in the narrow section of cave. A47 quickly turns around to seek out another path, but its camera captures the passage closing in front of it. A47 is trapped. The 2385-1 entity charges towards the remote-controlled drone and attacks, biting and slapping it with its powerful tail. It then attempts to consume it, but is unable to ingest the bulky drone and, instead, leaves the heavily damaged robot for dead, slithering away deeper into the cave. The battered drone lies immobile on the cave floor for several hours, its camera broadcasting until the last of its battery is finally about to run out. Just before it stops sending signals back to the research outpost, though, it captures something. The wall next to A47 opens up, and 2 of the larger SCP-2385-2 entities emerge from the new passageway. One of them approaches A47, as the other probes at the wall next to it with its head. It seems as though the larger of the entities are actually able to form new pathways in the cave, or at least open up doorways between existing ones. With the last of its battery power, A47 sends back a truly remarkable sight. Out of the hole opened by the 2385-2 entity appears D11424. He's dirty, disheveled, sporting a month's worth of beard growth, and brandishing a machete. The wall opens up from the -2 entity prodding at it, and the odd group exits through it. It's the last thing A47 transmits back to the Foundation. 2 months later, after several more failed manned missions, there was finally a success. An SCP-2385-2 instance that had wandered close to the entrance was retrieved from the cave system and brought back to a Foundation research site where a camera was surgically implanted in its head. The entity, which was designated as Subject Alpha, or SA, was then amnestetized and released back into the 2385 caves, allowing researchers to monitor how it behaved as it traveled through its home environment. The researchers watched as SA made its way through the cave system and stopped in another of the rooms filled with young versions of 2385-1. The larger entity approached several and appeared to nuzzle its face against theirs before moving on, which looked to have a calming effect on the extremely aggressive smaller versions. As it continues through the tunnels, SA sees a group of 2385-1 instances feeding on a deceased 2385-2. It appears that when 2385-1s are unable to swallow their prey whole, they burrow into the body and consume them from the inside out.
Luckily, they are too distracted by their meal to pay any attention to SA, and it is able to pass by. SA then runs into two other 2385-2 entities, and the three begin traveling through the caves together. They are soon attacked by a smaller -1, but the group is able to pin the biting and thrashing entity to the ground with their powerful tails, allowing SA to nuzzle it. Just like with the ones being birthed from the wall, this seems to calm the creature, but there is another effect as well. As the 2385-1 entity becomes more docile, the same fibrous growths that can be seen on the larger 2385-2 entities start to grow over its eyes. Is this how 2385-2s are created? The group of -2s continues their journey through the tunnels, often stopping to prod at the walls to open new pathways. It appears that they are searching for something, looking around each new room they enter before moving on. Eventually, they run into something, but it doesn't appear to be what they wanted to find. They enter a new section of cave, and blocking the path in front of them is the largest SCP-2385-1 entity yet recorded. It's as big as the -2s at over 7 meters in length and weighing an estimated 400 kilograms. It appears to be extremely hostile, but the -2s seem to instinctively know that the only way forward is to go past this massive -1. The trio nuzzles their heads together as if they are saying one final goodbye before one of the -2s charges straight ahead. The -1 attacks and quickly incapacitates it with its powerful tail and snapping jaws. It begins feeding on the -2, giving SA and its one remaining companion the time they need to get past. As the now duo moves past, the other is attacked from a side tunnel by a group of regular-sized but ferocious -1s. SA can't do anything to help. It seems to pick up the pace and continues on, but as it rounds a corner, it comes face-to-face with another large -1 instance. It turns down a side tunnel to avoid it, but finds itself in a dead end. It prods at the wall as the -1 rushes towards it, but no new passageways open. It turns around, seemingly resigned to its fate as the -1 begins attacking. But just then, something else appears in the tunnel coming towards them. It's D11424, charging forward with his machete raised in the air, his hair and beard both long and wild. He begins fighting the large -1 entity, hacking at it with his machete until it finally dies. With the vicious entity now dead, he kneels down next to SA and begins stroking its head in a calming manner. "Hey there, little guy. You all right?" he asks as he pets the 2385-2. "Yeah, you're fine. Get up. I know where it is. Come with me." SA struggles from its injuries, but is able to follow D11424 as he leads it through the tunnels, with D11424 stopping at one point to carve a piece off of the fleshy walls and consume it. The tunnels eventually open up into a large room that looks similar to the rest of the cave system, except there is a huge glowing orb at its center. It's a beautiful sphere of warm light that appears to be at least 10 meters in diameter. "Here we are," the D-Class tells SA, and motions towards the orb. "It's all right." SA nuzzles against D11424, perhaps one final thank you for saving its life, then instinctually seems to know what to do. The camera feed shows that it began crawling towards the sphere, and after a brief pause, started pushing itself inside. The camera recorded the brilliant light of the orb engulfing SA and its implanted camera before the feed finally cut out. The SCP Foundation would later discover that on that very same day, in the city of Elgin, Illinois, a local woman was admitted to the hospital after complaining of abdominal pains. Doctors performed emergency surgery and found something they did not expect. A micro camera had somehow become embedded inside of her body, which upon later investigations would be found to bear the same serial number as the one that had been implanted in SA. Following this strange event, SCP-2385, which had previously been classified as Euclid, was upgraded to Keter. An observation site has been built at the quarry and no further human expeditions are allowed inside. In a bit of good news, sometime later, D11424 finally emerged from the cave system. He was taken back into SCP Foundation custody and continues engaging in exploratory missions on behalf of the Foundation to this day. You and your friends exit a club and step onto the darkened city street. Everyone is in a happy and joyful mood. It's been a great night, one that you'll be reminiscing about with your friends for years. As you walk and laugh together, you don't notice the large man standing in front of you and almost run straight into him. You offer a quick apology and move to go around the man, but he steps in front of you, blocking your path. All of your friends grow quiet, and you finally take a good look at the man. The man towers over you. He is huge, with giant, elaborate tattoos wrapped around his bulging muscles. that it looks like he may have gotten to cover up the numerous white patches of skin that are missing pigmentation. His face, though, is bright red and filled with rage. The man begins screaming at you, asking why you ran into him and calling you horrible names. Again, you try to apologize, but the man just keeps yelling as if he can't even hear you. He pushes you hard in the chest, and you fall back into one of your friends. Another steps forward in an attempt to defuse the situation, but the man punches him in the face, breaking his jaw. A melee ensues, though it could more accurately be described as a massacre. The man has gone ballistic and punches, kicks, and bites your entire group of friends. His strength seems unreal, even for someone as big and muscular as him. A large bouncer runs over in an attempt to break up the fight, but even he is no match for this tattooed giant. You've been on the ground since he shoved you, watching this insanity play out, but now, with everyone else lying on the ground bloodied and bruised, he turns his attention back on you. You try to scramble back to your feet, but he's upon you in an instant. He picks you up over his head and tosses you into some trash cans, knocking you unconscious. You open your eyes to see the man standing over you. You can feel the blood from numerous cuts on your face running down into your eyes and mouth. The man picks you up with one hand and holds you by the throat against the wall. He's still in a rage, breathing hard through clenched teeth, bits of white foaming in the corners of his mouth as he brings up his other hand and curls his fingers into a fist. All you can think is this it? But then you notice something. The tattoo that snakes down the man's arm all the way to his hand is moving. The long serpentine dragon is writhing and slithering as if it's alive. Is this really happening, or just a result of the concussive trauma you've received? There's no time to consider it further, though, as the man pulls back and throws a punch right into your face. You can feel your nose flatten and break from the impact, which understandably distracts you from the bizarre occurrence that follows. Right as the man's bloodied fist makes contact with your face, the dragon on his arm seems to swim off of his skin and onto yours. Like a snake moving through water, it glides off his fist onto your face before sliding down your neck onto your body. There is a searing pain as it moves, like you're being poked with needles over and over. You scream from the pain, blood from your broken nose pouring out of your mouth. The man drops you to the ground and steps back. He no longer looks to be in a rage, and instead looks confused. He looks down at his skin to find that the tattoo is completely gone. A look of unbridled joy comes over his face, and he turns and runs away into the night, laughing with glee as he does so. You are left whimpering in pain, curled up in a ball in the pile of trash where he left you, the dragon tattoo now covering your entire body. As you have probably already guessed, this is no normal tattoo. No, this is an anomalous creature that is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-021, but it also has another name: the skin worm. SCP-021 is an obligate parasite that uses the human body as a host. Its visual appearance is in the form of a large, elaborate tattoo of an Oriental-style dragon, which covers roughly 1 square meter of its host's skin. What makes this tattoo truly unique is that it is fully animated and moves on the host's body just as a real animal would, though in 2D like a cartoon playing out in real time on their skin. The movement of the tattoo causes horrendous pain for the host, and has been described as feeling like thousands of tiny needles are stabbing at them all at once, as if a fresh image is being constantly tattooed on their skin, while at the same time, a tattoo removal process is happening. While the tattoo organism is able to move, it seems to prefer spending most of its time on its host's torso, though it has been seen to move around to other parts of the body on occasion. As SCP-021 moves around on the surface of its host's body, it appears to feed on the pigments in the skin. Its favored meal seems to be other tattoos, which it will seek out and devour, though if none are present, or if it has eaten all of the tattoos on its host, it will begin consuming the melanin from the skin instead. Melanin is a naturally occurring pigment found in human skin, and after SCP-021 sucks it from its host, it will leave them with permanent skin damage and patches of unpigmented skin that appear similar to that of the skin condition vitiligo. The feeding itself does not appear to cause the host any pain, and the pigments, whether they are from another tattoo or the natural ones in the skin, will simply disappear as 021 eats them. The pace at which SCP-021 feeds will vary, but it has been observed as being able to clear over half a square meter of skin in roughly 1 hour. One way to prevent SCP-021 from eating all of the melanin present on a human is to quickly add new tattoos of fruits or small animals as a way to continually distract it from turning to the melanin. Thus far, outside of motion, the organism has displayed no elevated intelligence or the ability to communicate. It simply moves and feeds. SCP-021 is not permanently affixed to the skin of any one host, and in fact, can be transferred back and forth between hosts multiple times. The only way to transfer the organism is through physical contact, though skin-to-skin contact does not guarantee that the organism will take to a new host. In the event that it does, the dragon tattoo appears to swim across the touching skin and will affix itself to the new human host. Skin-to-skin contact in the romantic sense has been shown to be the most reliable method of transfer from one host to another, with a 93% rate of successful transmission. However, as you can imagine, the tattooing sensation that comes along with any movement of SCP-021 means that this particular transfer is extremely painful for all parties involved, and the Foundation has deemed that despite its high success rate, it should only be used when absolutely necessary. Contact between two open wounds has been shown to be an only slightly less effective method, and has become the default means of transferring when the SCP Foundation wants to move SCP-021 from one host to another. Transferring the organism from a deceased host to a living one is possible, though more complicated. SCP-021 appears not to mind when its host organism is no longer alive, continuing to feed on whatever pigments are available to it, and does not seem to suffer any ill effect from the condition of its host. It is as yet unknown whether SCP-021 could be transferred to another species. So far, the organism has only been willing to move from human to human, though research into the question is ongoing. It's theorized that if SCP-021 is able to exist on a non-human animal, it would only occur in the rarest of circumstances. Unlike most parasites, SCP-021 does offer some small but tangible benefits to its host human. In addition to hosts of the organism appearing to have an improved immune system, research has also shown that the presence of 021 will increase its host's release and reuptake of epinephrine, better known as adrenaline. It will also decrease the buildup of lactic acid, which is what builds up in the muscles during activity and causes burning sensations and soreness. Combined, these benefits from SCP-021 provide its host with increased strength and confidence, as well as give a heightened pain tolerance during stressful situations. Not surprisingly, the host of SCP-021 also displays a high level of aggression, though whether this comes from their elevated hormone levels or simply because the organism causes them to be in constant pain is still an unanswered question. The amount of time that this symbiotic relationship can be sustained is typically limited to how long the host can tolerate the unceasing pain of the tattoo moving about their body. The persistent agony that a host of SCP-021 endures has led to multiple hosts having taken their own lives, and in a few rare cases, they have also succumbed to fatal skin infections, though these were likely the result of open wounds caused by the hosts scratching at their own skin, rather than anything directly attributable to the organism. SCP-021 is currently contained on the body of a D-Class personnel, D-139, who is housed in Standard Detention Cell 217A, and the relative ease with which it can be kept on a human subject's body has led to it receiving the safe classification. Only D-Class personnel are eligible to be a host to SCP-021, and current operating procedure is to allow the organism to live on the same host's body until they expire. The exact nature of what SCP-021 is, as well as its origins, remain a mystery to the Foundation. Attempts have been made to trace the path of its transmission from before its time in containment, and it is hypothesized that the organism could be many hundreds of years old, if not older. As evidenced by its low SCP number, 021 is one of the oldest SCPs that the Foundation keeps contained, and it has proven to be a very useful educational tool for new and upcoming researchers as they study this bizarre creature and its existence that occurs entirely within 2 dimensions. 2 teenagers cautiously approach an old, decrepit house. The house looks like it was built hundreds of years ago, and from the outside, it appears to be in a serious state of disrepair. The walls are cracked and weathered, the roof looks to have holes in it, and one of the decorative columns has completely collapsed. The teenagers have heard rumors about this dilapidated home, though, and they have heard there are riches still to be found inside. One of the teens starts walking up the stairs onto the porch, but his friend seems reluctant to follow. Is he sure that no one lives here? The braver of the teens tells his friend, that he's been watching the house for days and hasn't seen anyone come in or out. The only signs of life have been a very faint light visible between the cracks of the house's boarded-up windows, and he's not even sure if he actually saw any lights or not. If there is anyone in there, it's just some crazy old person. They can easily scare them off and loot the house at their leisure. His friend still doesn't look sure, but the other teen proceeds to take out a lockpick. He tells his friend to keep a lookout while he works on the door. He doesn't need to keep watch for long, though, since the lock almost immediately opens with a loud click. He opens the door carefully, but it still squeaks loudly. Through the crack, he can't see much of anything inside. It looks very dark. "Come on," he tells his friend as he slips inside. His friend looks nervous as he watches his friend disappear into the house. Suddenly, there's a loud crash. "Oh no, we've been caught," he thinks as he spins around. But he doesn't see a police officer coming to arrest them or a nosy passerby. Instead, he watches as a cat chases a rat into some trash cans, knocking more of them over. He breathes a sigh of relief as he watches the cat come out of the pile of trash, holding its prey limply by the tail. He turns to follow his friend into the house, but is stopped when the door snaps shut in his face. He tries the doorknob, but it's locked. He taps quietly on the door. No response. He taps a little louder, whispering, "Hey, what's going on?" But still no response. What is going on? Inside, his friend is also pulling on the doorknob, but it's no use. The door won't budge, and the lock won't turn. He also tries tapping lightly on the door, but there's no signs from outside that anyone has heard him. He's trapped. He looks around the darkened room. Just like the outside, the interior looks like it hasn't been updated in hundreds of years. Dust and cobwebs are everywhere, like no one has set foot inside in decades. And yet, on several small tables and shelves around the room, are lit candles. With no other option, he decides to move deeper into the house. He creeps into the next room, which is in much the same condition as the first, dusty and old, but with several candles placed around that give off just the faintest amount of flickering yellow light. Not only does someone still live here, but they've lit these candles recently. He takes a folding knife out of his pocket and opens it, holding the blade out in front of him. Just then, he hears something, a noise like footsteps, and it sounds like it's coming from upstairs in the room right above him. They might be coming down to look for him. He needs a place to hide. He spots a sofa near the corner and tries to get down behind it as much as possible. As he grips the edge of the sofa with one hand, he suddenly drops his knife to the floor and uses his now free hand to stifle a scream. He looks at the hand that was just gripping the sofa and sees a long sewing needle plunge deep into his hand. Was this stuck into the couch? He pulls the needle out of his hand. It nearly went all the way through, and holds the bloody wound up to his mouth, trying to stop the flow of blood as he waits and listens. The sound of footsteps finally stop. Whoever is walking around, it doesn't sound like they're coming down the stairs to find him. He has to get out of this house, though. There must be another way out. He picks up his knife and quietly moves to the next room. Once again, it's in the same condition as the last. But wait, what's that in the corner? Is that a person lying there? Outside the house, his friend is looking through the same trash that he saw the cat hunting in. Aha! Just what he was looking for, an old wire hanger. He runs back to the old house, untwists it, and inserts the thin wire into the lock. Inside, the trespassing teen gets closer and closer to the thing in the corner. It's so dim, though, with the only light coming from the candles, that he still can't make out what it is. But he feels strangely compelled to find out. He picks up one of the candles off of a nearby table. Outside, he still can't get the lock open, but he's got to keep trying. He can't leave his friend trapped inside. He's standing right over the thing in the corner now. He kneels down and brings the candle close to see what it is, and screams. His friend throws down the hanger in frustration before sitting down on the porch. He can't figure out why his friend was able to open the lock so easily, and now it won't move. Did something in the mechanism break? He doesn't know what he's going to do, though. Should he call for help? The police will arrest them both if he does. How long should he wait, though? It feels like his friend has been stuck for a long time, and he hasn't heard anything from inside. What could possibly be happening in there? Should he just leave and hope that his friend is able to escape on his own? Just as he is wondering what to do, he hears a click behind him. He turns around and tries the door handle, but it's still locked. He looks down and sees the wire hanger. Maybe he'll give it one more try. He sticks the hanger into the lock and hears the lock pop open almost instantly. He tries the door handle, and this time, the door swings open. He stands there looking through the cracked door into the dark house. He's terrified at the thought of going inside, but he can't leave his friend in there. If he's in trouble, then he has to save him. Gathering up all of his courage, he enters the house and sees the same thing his friend did, a dusty old room. He takes a step into the candlelit room and freezes. There's something in the middle of the room. It's a chair that's turned away from him, but he can see that someone is sitting in it. But wait, is that his friend? "Hey," he calls in a loud whisper, but his friend doesn't respond. "Come on, let's get out of here." Still no response. He starts walking toward his friend, but stops when he hears what sounds like footsteps coming from the room above him. He's got to get his friend and get out of this house. He checks over his shoulder to make sure the door is still open before starting to quietly move towards his friend again. He's close enough that he can reach out and shake his shoulder, but his friend doesn't react. He walks around to the front of the chair and sees his friend. Except it's no longer his friend. Staring back at him are two empty eye sockets. His mouth has been pulled back by stitches of thread into a horrifying permanent grin. But worst of all is what he hears. It's the sound of the front door slamming shut. Privyet! Today's file is a special one and comes from the Russian branch of the SCP Foundation. It's SCP-1098-RU, also known as the Theater of Living Puppets. SCP-1098-RU is a two-story house located in a small Russian city which appears to have been constructed in the Baroque style, which was popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, and is characterized by its exuberant details. The house is likely several hundred years old and is in an advanced state of disrepair. The local government administration has marked the house for demolition multiple times, but for reasons that remain unknown, these plans are always scrapped or indefinitely delayed. All of the doors that lead into SCP-1098-RU are locked, and the windows are all boarded up. Anyone who attempts to damage the house, even just by removing the boards from the windows, will experience an odd anomalous effect that compels them to instead protect the structure and cause it no harm. This effect only wears off when the subject moves at least 50 meters away from the house. The only way to enter SCP-1098-RU is through the front door, which, even though it is locked, is easily able to be picked open, which causes no harm to the house and prevents the anomalous effect from overcoming the subject trying to gain entrance. Once someone has entered the house, they will find that the door closes behind them and locks itself. The lock cannot then be picked open again for 1 hour. The interior of the house matches the exterior stylistically, also appearing to have been designed in the Baroque style and in a poor condition. The house is quite dark since there are no electric lights present, and all of the windows are boarded up, blocking any outside light. The only illumination comes from the lit candles that are placed around the house, which appear to be constantly replaced and lit again when they burn out. The sound of slow footsteps can be heard inside the house, though the room they are coming from seems to change. The entity producing the sounds has been classified as SCP-1098-RU-1, and it is thought that it is also responsible for the placing and relighting of candles around the house, as well as several other anomalous effects. The Russian branch of the SCP Foundation first became aware of potential anomalous activity related to SCP-1098-RU after the disappearance of multiple teenagers was linked to the location. In interviews, many of their friends and family reported that their last known locations were near the site of the old Baroque-style home, and several had expressed a desire to investigate the house before they disappeared. Local police investigated the house, which only led to them disappearing as well. After learning of the strange activity connected to the house, the Foundation took over the investigation, planting a cover story that totalitarian sects were responsible for the disappearances, while Class A amnestics were administered to all relatives of the missing teens. The Foundation immediately began investigating the house, but carefully, since they had already seen how easily people could go missing inside. In the first excursion into the house, a remotely controlled robot fitted with a camera was sent inside. Just like when a person enters, the door closed and locked behind the robot, but its camera feed continued to broadcast images to the researchers outside. As the robot explored the rundown house's rooms, it found something much more disturbing than just lit candles. In several of the rooms, corpses were discovered, which were later identified as being some of the missing teenagers. All of the bodies found had their eyeballs removed, and thick threads had been sewn into their arms and legs, as if they had been turned into giant living puppets. Some of them also had stitches in their chest and face areas. The face stitches appear to have been made to force the face to have a certain expression, while the chest stitches may indicate that organs had been removed. No signs of decomposition were present, though, despite some of the bodies likely being many months old. Several objects were also found next to the bodies, including surgical knives, needles, thread, and at least one artificial eye. Exactly 1 hour after the robot entered the house, the camera ceased broadcasting images and all contact was lost. For the second excursion into the house, the Foundation decided that a human being would be more effective at gathering information than a robot. A Class D personnel was given a flashlight, a camera, and a radio, and sent on a mission to attempt to remove objects from the house and to locate the robot from the first research mission. The D-Class entered the house, and researchers noted that from what they could see on the video feed, that the layout of the house hadn't changed. Candles were still present around the room, though it was clear that they had been replaced by fresh ones. As the D-Class explored the first floor of the house, he reported that he could hear footsteps coming from different parts of the house, and on one occasion, that they sounded like they were coming from a room he had just left. But when he returned to that room, no one was present. He wasn't able to locate the missing robot, but did find the same corpses that the robot had. He was ordered by the researchers to pick up one of the surgical knives and try bringing it out of the house, but the moment he picked it up, all contact was lost. A third mission into the house was then tried, this time with another remotely controlled robot, though this one was more advanced and equipped with a thermal imager and audio recording equipment. This robot was also better suited for exploration and was capable of climbing stairs so that the Foundation could finally find out what was on the second floor of this strange house. The robot entered the home and ascended to the second floor. As it explored the rooms, it found one particularly strange one that appeared to be operating as a kind of sewing workshop, with huge amounts of thread, needles, and other sewing supplies spread across multiple tables. Dark red stains covered many of the tables, but no bodies were discovered in the sewing room. The robot continued to explore the second floor, though, and soon discovered many more corpses, accounting for nearly all of the missing teenagers, the police that had vanished, as well as the missing D-Class personnel. All of them had been dressed in 18th century style clothing, and their eyes had been removed and replaced with artificial ones, giving them a perpetual glassy-eyed stare. Long, thick threads had been sewn into their arms and legs as well. The sound recording equipment on the robot captured the same sounds of footsteps that the D-Class had reported, but the thermal imager didn't locate any signs of life. The researchers decided to call an end to the experiment and began guiding the robot back out of the house, but just as it reached the front door, the connection was lost, and the robot has never been located. One final expedition into the home was approved, this time using another D-Class personnel, whose mission was to explore the entire house, including the second floor, before attempting to leave the home. The D-Class entered the home as normal, but immediately reported feeling a strange feeling that the other D-Class hadn't mentioned. He told the researchers listening that he was experiencing an intense headache and pressure in his ears, and that he could hear what sounded like someone crying in another room. None of the equipment picked up the crying sounds, and the D-Class was ordered to investigate further. He approached the room that he claimed the sound was coming from, but still nothing was detected on the audio recording equipment. He was ordered to enter the room, and though he seemed scared and reluctant, eventually he did so. Once inside, he reported seeing a young girl wearing an 18th century style dress. The girl was dancing, but crying as she did so. Just like on the corpses that had previously been found inside the house, threads were connected to her arms and legs, but these ones were pulled tight and stretched up towards the ceiling. The D-Class followed their path up, but they disappeared into the darkness, reporting that it looked like there was no ceiling at all, just an inky black void where something was manipulating the strings attached to the girl, forcing her to dance. None of these visuals reported by the Class D could be seen on the video feeds the researchers were watching. As far as they could see, he was staring into an empty room. The D-Class was ordered to continue watching this strange recital, though, and after 5 minutes, all of the communication devices ceased working. The video feed was lost too, but the audio continued to record for a few more seconds, during which time a sharp clap noise was heard. The D-Class began screaming as a deep male voice spoke a phrase in Latin, "Et perficiendi sit pretium." The performance must be paid for. No further signs of the D-Class were ever found. SCP-1098-RU has since been fenced off to prevent the general public from being able to enter it. A patrol team of 4 security guards is always on site, and anyone who attempts to gain entry to the house is to be detained, interrogated, and administered Class B amnestics. Additional research into SCP-1098-RU is ongoing, but requires approval from at least 2 members of the O5 Council, and to date, no further expeditions inside this anomaly, which has been given the object class Euclid, have been authorized. It is still unknown who or what exactly the entity inside of SCP-1098-RU is, but it has been designated as SCP-1098-RU-1, and some in the Foundation have taken to calling it by a nickname, the Master of Puppets.
It is a mild evening in Paris, France, and the sound of ticking clocks fills a modest church tucked down a less populous street. From the outside, it looks like any ordinary Christian church, but inside, it is quite different. There are gears and cogs on the walls where stained glass windows might ordinarily be placed, and the altar resembles the inner workings of a massive clock. The ticking sound is coming not from any timepieces, but from the congregation themselves. This is a ceremony for members of the Cogwork Orthodoxy, an offshoot of the Mechanists, or the Church of the Broken God. The congregation is small, a little less than a dozen in attendance, but they are devout in their faith. A solemn hush falls over the room as the patriarch stands before them, holding a bottle of holy oil. He beckons up each congregant to the altar, where he anoints them with the oil on whatever cogwork augmentation is most easily accessible. Some have visible gears, others limbs made from brass. One man has a clock in the middle of his forehead like a third eye. After all have been anointed, they return to their seats and bow their heads in solemn prayer. Tick, tick, tick. The sound is rhythmic and constant, like one shared heart thrumming all together. The sound fills the room, steady as it always has been, but then the pace changes suddenly, for the very first time. The ticking comes faster now, less like a familiar clock and more like a bomb ready to go off. It ticks faster, faster, faster. The sound of grinding metal fills the room, interrupting whatever peace remained. The patriarch cries out in pain, holding his chest. His eyes widen, and all of a sudden, his chest explodes, metal fragments flying in every direction. One by one, the rest of the congregation follow, their augmented bodies failing them in a shocking display. Metal legs fuse together, gears grind, spark, and explode. The rifle grafted into one man's arm begins firing at random. An internal combustion engine heart fails, and a woman collapses to the ground. All the while, the initial explosion has set fire to the old wooden beams of the building. It is all going up in flames. By the time the authorities arrive on the scene, over 50,000 euros of damage has been done to the building, and the entire congregation is dead. It doesn't take long for the SCP Foundation to become involved, or for them to suspect foul play. The Cogwork Orthodoxy are relatively peaceful, and have never been involved in an incident quite like this before. No, someone planned this, and executed it meticulously. The question is, how? And why? Following the 2011 incident at the Cogwork Orthodoxy Church, other cases of this mysterious ailment began popping up. The Foundation was able to take several bodies for autopsy, though the means by which this was accomplished are obscure to me. They determined that the failure of the victims' bodies and augmentations was caused by a parasitic infestation. Somehow, they had all been dosed with the same contaminated material. But what was the link between these parasites and technological failure on a massive, deadly scale? The clues were scarce, and there was little to point the Foundation in the direction of motive or means, as dozens of deaths were reported. With little else to go on, the Foundation classified the parasites SCP-3859. Whatever their exact nature, they were like nothing anyone had ever seen before. That much was certain, even if nothing else was. They were able to interview a victim after all of the previous infected had died on the scene. Following one of the attacks in Lyon, a Maxwellist was kept alive long enough for the Foundation to conduct an interview. He was able to communicate via writing, but the state of his SCP-3859 infestation rendered him unable to speak, as it interfered with the function of his vocal processors. Rather than transmitting anything he wanted to say, they instead played a continuously looping message in French that translated to,
"You are nothing but an engine powered by ignorance. Forsake your superstition, your god of metal, your blind faith that has caused you to suffer. We have created the antivirus for your technological blight, the firewall to cleanse Europe of your influence. You are nothing but a flaw in history, and we shall cut you out. Vive la rationalité! Vive l'atheisme!
The message continued to play until the subject's artificial pineal gland was destroyed, killing him. After this incident, the trail went cold for about a year. More cases turned up, but they brought no information. Then, a surprising development broke it all wide open, tipping over the first card that would bring the entire house down. In late 2015, French parasitologist Frédéric Lacroix was checked into the hospital after his pacemaker failed. While he was being examined, unusual parasites were found in his system. They had somehow eaten away most of his pacemaker, and it failed after 3 days of intensive care. But there was something that set Lacroix apart from other victims of the parasite that the Foundation was beginning to call SCP-3859. He was a staunch atheist. In fact, he was so opposed to organized religion that he had previously been arrested after fighting with a priest in his hometown of Orléans. So what, the Foundation wondered, made him the exception to the rule? Why did the parasites choose him as their first non-religious target? Surely his field of research being parasitology couldn't be a coincidence. They decided to dispatch a team to investigate more thoroughly. Agent Catherine Dubois led a mobile task force operating under the cover story that they were national police officers investigating Lacroix's death. They went to Lacroix's house, attempting to uncover any clues that might indicate his connection to SCP-3859. After Lacroix's widow granted them access to the house, they began a thorough search. In his bedroom, they uncovered a large book entitled The Holy Bible with commentaries by C.I. Schofield and a guide to Bible study. This struck them as odd, given his atheist leanings, and one of the officers picked it up. It was partially hollow and rattled when shaken. They opened the book and tipped its contents out onto the desk. This would prove to be a mistake, as the desk promptly burst into flames. It had been booby-trapped. Luckily, the task force moved quickly and was able to salvage most of the documents contained within before the fire could consume them. They also put out the fire without alerting the widow Lacroix. But when the task force reached the door, they found more officers waiting there. These strangers also claimed to be from the National Police, but the MTF smelled something fishy, and it wasn't the widow Lacroix making bouillabaisse. There was no way these officers were National Police. They held Rugers when the National Police were known to carry SIG Pros. No, these were not cops. The MTF had to get out of there, and fast. They ran out the back of the house and commandeered a vehicle from a, let's say, somewhat willing civilian. As they drove away, gunfire ricocheted off the body of the car. The enemy officers were in pursuit, and they teleported their car in front of the MTF in an attempt to cut them off. With the assistance of MTF Omega-5, the Jewelers, the task force was able to evade this enemy force. They were also able to connect the weapons and technology to an existing group of interest. They seemed to be affiliated with Rubus, or Recovery, Use, Bellicosity, and Inhibition of Singularities. A deeper look revealed Lacroix's true allegiance. He was a member of Saphir, a militant atheist organization dedicated to wiping out religious organizations worldwide. This was the French branch. The English branch is known as Sapphire. One of the documents recovered from Lacroix's home revealed this allegiance, titled A Brief Manifesto Against the Mechanite Superstition and How to Topple It. They described followers of the Mechanite faith as people who look human, but their hearts beat to the tune of clockwork. Their breath is the humming of a computer fan, and their muscles bulge with carbon fibers, the likes of which we can only hope to develop. Some of them even go so far as to replace their pineal glands, an organ often associated with the superstitious world. The manifesto lamented the inability of Saphir pamphlets to deprogram Mechanites, people so devoted to their faith that they would change their bodies permanently. But this faith, in the words of the manifesto, would derive their doom. This is where the development of SCP-3859 comes in. In October of 2010, a Mechanite was found and disassembled by Rubus agents. Whether they were alive or not during this process, I could not determine. In this Mechanite's body, Rubus agents found an organic interface virus, or a virus created from nanotechnology. In short, an OIV is like a computer virus made material, made into something that can infect a human body. This virus was intended to respond to strong Mechanite faith and to prevent the organic parts of a person's body from rejecting their new inorganic modifications. But programming can be rewritten, and Saphir was determined to find a way to reverse the purpose of this OIV and cause it to reject these inorganic components. However, they ran into one problem. The virus would not interact directly with the human body. It was engineered for the specific mechanite it was found in and did not take to other human subjects. But then Dr. LaCroix discovered an ingenious solution. The dead mechanite was not just full of technological augmentations, they were also infested with hookworms who had been infected with the OIV. He took these hookworms and created a new species named Ancylostoma nedludi, named for the Luddites who destroyed technology deemed evil. The manifesto closed with a goal. By the close of 2015, we expect to eliminate any mechanite influence on the continent. So Dr. LaCroix created SCP-3859, but he also wound up in a hospital bed, dying as a result of his creation. As one mystery was solved, another revealed itself. What went wrong? The plot only thickened as more Saphir agents died in the wake of LaCroix's death. 6 in total perished from an infestation of SCP-3859. Each was killed when their metal tooth fillings exploded, causing fatal brain hemorrhaging. We know the devastating impact that it has had. Some know it all too well. But what exactly is SCP-3859? The Foundation was able to determine a bit about its nature. It is a microscopic parasite that has been infected with an OIV. This particular OIV results in nanotechnological augmentations to the parasite. It is in the same genus as Old World hookworm, but is hermaphroditic rather than dioecious, setting it apart from most hookworms. It also, closer study has revealed, appears to have been hybridized with tardigrade DNA at some point in the prior 200 generations. The function of SCP-3859 in the human body is to infest hosts with artificial components added to their physiology and to destroy them. Again, this is notably different from ordinary hookworms, who do not normally behave in an aggressive fashion or leave the digestive tracts of their hosts. This would suggest that the technological components of SCP-3859 are causing them to act in defiance of their nature. Saphir's aims in creating this augmented parasite are clear, but what is still unclear is what happened next. Why did LaCroix's creation turn on him? What happened? Well, when I first began looking into SCP-3859, it seemed we would never know for sure. But then, Saphir released a statement, along with some formally classified files. I'll save those for later. First, their statement, issued in December of 2015 to all Saphir agents. Effective immediately, all LaCroix hookworms in possession of Saphir are to be destroyed, and the program is to be discontinued. They are acting indiscriminately, affecting atheist and superstitious alike. 20 have died from infestation, including LaCroix. LaCroix was a traitor and a mechanist. His rank is stripped, and his name will be wiped from our history. The statement is intriguing and includes some bold claims. The Foundation was not able to find any information linking LaCroix to Mechanism or anything indicating him as some sort of double agent. Therefore, I was thrilled when a former Rubis agent was able to help the Foundation decipher LaCroix's original journal entries, eager to see what light they might shed on the whole matter. Nothing could prepare me for what I learned. Saphir's assertions about LaCroix were wrong, and the truth was so much stranger than anyone could have anticipated, even the SCP Foundation. In his writings, Dr. LaCroix referred to the parasites as his children, an impulse that, though unsettling, I can sympathize with. It is a lonely business locked away with only one's research for the company. His aims with that research, however, I am a good deal less sympathetic to. Using research on the crucifix protein, a protein supposedly found in the brains of the devoutly religious, he modified the hookworms. Whenever they detected the presence of this compound, the parasites would become aggressive and highly destructive. They would seek out anything unnatural added to the human body and tear it apart with gusto. As a test subject, he selected the congregation of a church, one of whom was known to have a pacemaker. A friend of LaCroix's, hiding in plain sight amongst the clergy, spiked the communion wine with parasites on St. Valentine's Day. The experiment was a success, from LaCroix's perspective at least. One poor parishioner dropped dead of a broken heart that Valentine's Day, or at least of an overloaded pacemaker. The next documented experiment was the fateful day of the Cogwork Orthodox service in Paris, the day that the Foundation first discovered the existence of SCP-3859. LaCroix slipped his children into the holy oil, and there were no survivors. On October 12, 2012, Dr. LaCroix received word from Nova Scotia that one of his Saphir colleagues had died. The cause of death? His teeth exploded, and there were signs that the hookworms had made their way into his system. He had been placed there as an aide to a cardinal, while reporting back to Saphir in secret. LaCroix theorized that he had begun to develop a sense of faith, and thus his death was his own fault. By June 17th of the same year, there were no more mechanists left in central France. Sure, a few fringe believers remained scattered through Paris, but most sects that had previously held a strong presence there either fled the country or simply perished. Dr. LaCroix considered himself victorious, but the bodies had not yet finished piling up. By May 4th, 2014, 10 people who worked alongside Dr. LaCroix on the project were dead. Autopsies revealed that all of them had the hookworms in their systems, and they had all recently been in contact with mechanites. Dr. LaCroix theorized that these colleagues had been hacked, and that the reclaimed technology in their bodies had been hacked by mechanite influences that left them vulnerable to the effects of the parasites. A software update would fix it. At least, that's what he thought. An analysis of the software showed no changes at all. Strange. Perhaps an explanation would reveal itself under further scrutiny. On March 7, 2015, Dr. LaCroix began to feel ill. He experienced tremors, sweating, a fever, and persistent vomiting. The containment of his project had failed, and there were hookworms in his system. Not to worry, though. These hookworms wouldn't do much without the crucifix protein being present. He took some of the antiparasitics kept around at the lab and waited for his symptoms to abate. But on March 15th, he was still feeling ill. It was then that he realized a drastic error he had made. By changing the physiology of the worms and making them hermaphroditic, they were able to reproduce more quickly than the medication could kill them. He checked himself into the hospital for more thorough treatment. After 5 days, the infection had been effectively addressed, and he was ready to recuperate and get back to work. But again, the situation was far worse than he realized. On March 23rd, Dr. LaCroix was working at his desk when he suddenly collapsed to the floor. His heart was seizing up, skipping beats at a time. It was his pacemaker, he realized. Its battery was running out. He would need to go to the hospital as soon as possible to have it repaired. But before he did, he decided to perform a few tests on himself. He took a sample of his blood and analyzed it. What he saw should have been impossible, but nevertheless, there they were. Crucifix proteins in his blood, the blood of a staunch non-believer. The worms were feasting. Somehow he had been poisoned with extreme faith. There was no going back. He was going to die at the hand of his own creation. He checked himself into the hospital and was informed by his doctors that there was nothing wrong with his blood except for the parasites present there. His pacemaker, on the other hand, was severely damaged. Its wires had been severed. Dr. LaCroix knew that the hookworms were the culprit and that he had a week left to live at most. But how had the crucifix proteins made their way into his blood? Had someone somehow injected him with a contaminated sample? But no. As much as he wanted to believe that, he knew it was something else. He had examined other blood samples that he kept around the lab for emergency transfusions, samples from dozens of his colleagues. Every single one of them contained the crucifix protein, and it was naturally occurring. No evidence of tampering. There was only one remaining explanation. His ultimate entry I will simply quote verbatim, and let his dying words speak for themselves. The doctor says there's nothing wrong with my blood other than the parasites, and my pacemaker wires have been severed. I maybe have a week left. I feel as if I am committing treason while writing this. I tested samples I keep in my lab for emergency transfusions. All of our blood has the crucifix protein, and it's occurring naturally. We have failed. In our quest to make the world a reasonable place, we have made it a crusade. Saphir is a cult. Atheism is a religion. God help us. Though its use has decreased since 2015, there are still active instances of SCP-3859 on the European continent. As a countermeasure, anti-parasitic drugs have been introduced into the water supply of France and its surrounding nations. A new EU regulation was also lobbied for by several Foundation companies, increasing food safety standards for items such as Eucharist wafers and other consumables used in religious ceremonies. Any Foundation personnel believed to have been infected with SCP-3859 must be administered a cocktail of antiparasitics and anti-OI viral drugs. The exact makeup of this cocktail may be accessed only by approved Foundation medical personnel. Over the course of my time researching the outskirts of the known world, the places beyond our imaginations, I have come face to face with hundreds of belief systems. Some are off-putting, others comforting, and all of them alien to me. The one constant I have seen again and again is this: extremism, the sort that seeks the elimination of all its opponents through whatever means necessary, always sows the seeds of its own destruction. It seems that Dr. LaCroix sowed those very seeds when he engineered SCP-3859 and reaped them in the most devastating fashion. The story of Saphir and its hookworms, the disease that turned on them when their fervor became violent, is a cautionary tale. Our beliefs can buoy us through the stormy sea of life, can lift us up and keep us sane. But if left entirely unchecked and unexamined, they can steer us straight into our doom.
A climber struggles on the side of the mountain. He's so close to the summit of Mount Everest that he can taste it. He just needs to triumph over this last difficult section, and he will have fulfilled his lifetime dream of standing at the top of the world. He needs to hurry, though. At this altitude, the air is so thin and the temperature is so cold that your body is slowly dying. There's a reason this topmost section of the mountain is known as the Death Zone. He glances down behind him and spots something. Is that another climber? That's strange, he thinks. He was at the very back of his group, and there shouldn't have been anyone else coming up behind him. It must be a solo climber. The soloist doesn't look to be moving, though. He's just staring at him, and the climber can't seem to take his eyes off him. Suddenly, the climber starts feeling odd. He begins to feel warm and comfortable. The aches and pains of the long journey melt away. He decides to sit down on a small ledge and relax. He watches as the solo climber comes towards him. He must be a professional with the way he effortlessly moves up the mountain. He watches him make great time, getting closer and closer. He loses sight as the solo climber reaches the same difficult section he had been struggling with. He imagines the solo climber will soon zip past him on his way to the summit. But just then, the soloist pops up right in front of him. He clasps his hands on the climber's shoulders and pulls him close, staring into his eyes with those dark, black goggles. They feel like they're pulling him into their depths, and there's nothing he can do to resist it. The climber tries to scream, but all that comes out of his mouth is silence. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-1529, also known as King of the Mountain. But first, a quick personal request from me. I need your help to spread the word about the lesser-known anomalies in the SCP Foundation's archives. The best thing you can do to help me is subscribe, turn on notifications, and then go tell your friends to do the same. This is a huge help and will let me bring you more and more SCP videos. Now, back to our file. SCP-1529 is an entity with a humanoid appearance that resides near the summit of Mount Everest in Nepal. It is only found above 8,000 meters, which places it in the part of the mountain referred to as the Death Zone, where oxygen levels are too low to support human life for any extended period of time. It is roughly equivalent to an average human male in height and weight, and its outer appearance resembles normal mountaineering clothes, with a heavy parka, pants, and boots that are all white in color. Its face is completely obscured by a large hood, with the only visible detail being a pair of large, dark goggles. SCP-1529 has never been seen wearing any other outfit, and in fact, it is unknown whether these are articles of clothing at all, or if they are actually a part of its body. The SCP Foundation first became aware of an anomalous entity lurking near the top of Mount Everest in the 1970s, when climbing expeditions to the summit became more commonplace among professional and amateur mountaineers alike. Rumors began to spread and told of a monster that was killing unfortunate climbers. In 1999, the body of George Mallory, who is believed to be the first person to reach the top of Mount Everest, was located, and photographic film found on his body was developed. From those pictures, it is now known that SCP-1529 was present at least as early as his 1924 expedition. When sufficient daylight and a lack of cloud cover allows observation of the peak by telescope, SCP-1529 can be seen sitting or lying on the mountain, apparently motionless in an inactive state. These motionless periods have been seen to last anywhere from 17 minutes to as long as 8 months. When active, though, it can be seen summiting and descending the upper portion of the mountain, though it never uses any climbing tools and will ignore established climbing ropes and ladders that have been installed by other climbers. It has also been observed easily traversing portions of the mountain that are considered too difficult or altogether impossible by experienced climbers. Additionally, SCP-1529 is not impacted by the freezing temperatures, extreme wind speeds, or low oxygen levels at the top of the mountain, and it has never once been seen to stumble, fall, or even lose its grip. It is unknown what prompts SCP-1529 to become active or enter a resting inactive phase, nor has there been any established correlation of these phases to weather, time of year, or traffic on the mountain. Its active periods have been observed to last between mere hours to several days, but the exact amount is hard to know for sure. Nighttime observation of 1529 has so far been impossible, even with thermal imaging cameras, since it produces no heat, with its temperatures being the same as that of the surrounding environment. When in its active phase, if a human climber passes the 8,000-meter mark, then SCP-1529 will begin to make its way towards them, putting itself in the path between the climber and either the summit if they are ascending, or their camp if they are descending. It seems to prefer to go after solo climbers, or those that are significantly ahead or behind their climbing group, but it has been observed targeting climbers in a group when a solo opportunity is not available. Once SCP-1529 is within eyesight of its targeted climber, it will attempt to gain their attention and then lock eyes with them, which produces a hypnotic effect. The climber will find that they are unable to break eye contact with SCP-1529, and will then begin to experience feelings of warmth and euphoria, similar to the effects of hypothermia and hypoxia, also known as altitude sickness. The victim will feel the overwhelming desire to sit down where they are, and once they stop moving, SCP-1529 will quickly close the distance between them. Once SCP-1529 reaches the victim, death is almost a certainty. An examination of bodies has shown the cause to be from hypothermia. Strangely, it's been observed that victims seem to succumb within just 1 to 2 hours after having first made eye contact with SCP-1529, a period of time much shorter than usual for climbers trapped on the summit of Everest. After death, the victims' bodies experience an accelerated rate of decay, and after mere hours or days, the bodies become rotted and mummified at a level comparable to bodies that have been exposed to the wind and cold of the mountain for decades. Many of the over 200 deaths on Mount Everest have been attributed to SCP-1529, and the rare survivor of an encounter is almost always due to the intervention of another mountaineer, who was able to offer assistance to the entranced climber before SCP-1529 was able to reach them. There have been several notable reports from survivors of interactions with SCP-1529. One, known as Incident 1529-1, is also the only documented instance of SCP-1529 descending below the 8,000-meter mark. During the incident, the entity entered Camp 5, located on the northern approach of the mountain at 7,775 meters, which resulted in multiple deaths, including 2 Foundation personnel who were operating the monitoring posts. One climber, who had initially believed to have been killed in the incident, was discovered to still be alive 2 days later when Foundation personnel were conducting investigations at the camp. He was safely removed from the mountain, though he required the amputation of several frostbitten fingers and toes. During an interview with a Foundation agent, they described spotting SCP-1529 just 10 minutes after leaving the summit of the mountain. After locking eyes with the entity, they began to feel happy, comfortable, and relieved, like they were back at home next to a warm fire. But then suddenly the warmth was gone, and they experienced a sensation of cold more powerful than anything they had felt before. They were stuck, and could only watch as 1529 made its way towards them. When it finally reached them, it placed its hands on their shoulders and pulled them up into its face so that they were staring right into its black goggles. Images began to appear in the dark depths of the goggles. People warm and happy, sitting next to fires, in hot baths, or sunning on a beach. They tried to resist the strange pull of the creature with all of their might. They then heard something in their mind, a question from SCP-1529. It asked, "You would refuse my gift?" The stranded climber struggled to answer, using all of their willpower and strength to move their lips and whisper a single word. Yes. SCP-1529 responded by showing more images of people, but this time, they were bodies lying dead in the snow. Countless victims trapped on Mount Everest forever. SCP-1529 made them watch their deaths play out in long, drawn-out detail, a witness to every second of their demise. The climber was sure they would soon join them, but then they found something deep inside of them, a spark of life, a will to resist. They clenched their fist, and with their final ounce of strength, they punched SCP-1529. The goggles appeared to crack, and the next thing the climber knew, they were woken up by the Foundation recovery team. Following this encounter, the climber never attempted to summit another mountain. When they eventually passed away some years later, An autopsy revealed that their cause of death was consistent with extreme hypothermia, frostbite, and cerebral edema, despite not having been in a cold environment or above 500 meters in altitude in the previous 12 months. SCP-1529 has been classified as Euclid and is to be kept under telescope and satellite surveillance whenever possible, though telescope observation should make use of a delayed video feed, as observers have reported seeing SCP-1529 appearing to stare back at them, and reported feeling symptoms consistent with an encounter, including hypothermia and frostbite. The Foundation maintains communication with civilian mountaineering expeditions to prevent summiting attempts when SCP-1529 is active. The bodies of any victims are to be removed from the mountain if possible for autopsy, with their deaths being officially classified as having been from natural causes related to altitude sickness and hypothermia. Any survivors of encounters with SCP-1529 are to be debriefed and administered amnestics. Mobile Task Force Psi-29029, also known as Alpine Echo, is to remain on standby at all times at a permanent monitoring station, with on-duty members remaining in a pressurized environment acclimatized to 7,900 meters above sea level, allowing them to quickly deploy via helicopter if need be. Finally, and most troubling, is that aerial surveillance of another mountain has revealed an individual similar in appearance to SCP-1529. The location remains classified, and the local government has prohibited climbing on the peak, so threats to humanity are minimal at this time. But the Foundation will continue to monitor it and other mountains for anomalous activity.
A young man steps off the subway into the station. Like many others on their daily commute, he has headphones on and keeps his eyes glued to his phone as he messages his friends, plays mobile games, and watches videos. He takes the escalator up and out of the subway station, paying no mind to the rats that scurry past down the handrail. He steps out onto the street, head still never looking up from his phone. He's made the same trip hundreds, if not thousands of times, each step of his route home so burned into his mind that he could make this journey blindfolded. He turns a corner when, suddenly, he looks up. There's something different. In the split second before everything goes wrong, he realizes what it is. The grate he has stepped onto has just given way. The young man screams as he falls through the loose drainage grate in the sidewalk and is swallowed up into the bowels of the city. He is in the air for only moments before landing with a thud in the darkness below. The air is knocked out of him, but he's immediately aware that he didn't hit the ground as hard as he could have. Something must have broken his fall. It's too dark to see anything, though. He feels around for his phone. It must be around here somewhere. There, he's got it. The screen is cracked, but luckily, it still works. He turns on the flashlight and looks around. He appears to be in some kind of maintenance area below the sidewalk. The room is mostly empty. So what did he land on? He sits up and looks beneath him to find rats. A huge pile of rats. The young man screams and hops up as the rats squeak and scatter. He's in a panic, looking for a way to get out of here as quickly as possible, when he spots something else. There's a pile of dirty clothes in the corner of the room, or at least, he hopes it's a pile of dirty clothes. He slowly steps towards whatever it is. Even after his own harrowing ordeal, he still feels compelled to check it out. If he just found a body, the police will need to know, and he might even get his name in the paper. He can see the headline now. Local man finds missing heiress after heroically plunging into city's depths, inherits her millions for some reason. As he steps closer, he notices a cloud of gnats and flies buzzing around the pile. He slaps at his neck, killing some kind of biting fly. He's standing right next to the pile, but he still can't tell if this is a person or not. "Hello? Are you okay?" the young man asks. No response. He nudges the pile with his foot and jumps back. Did he feel something move? He sticks out his foot and nudges it again. The pile definitely moves this time. A man rolls over, his face covered in bug bites. He's moaning and reaching out, unable to see from his blind eyes that look like they have been gnawed out by rats. He opens his mouth and with one last gasp, appears to die right in front of the young man. The young man can only watch, frozen in fear, as a rat wriggles its way out of his open mouth and stares at the young man. The young man screams, turns, and runs. He doesn't know where he's going as he runs through the dark tunnels, but he finds a set of stairs and follows them up before bursting out of a door into the open air. He slams the door behind him. He's sure the man he saw in the tunnels died, but he's not taking any chances. He runs the rest of the way home, taking the stairs up to his apartment two at a time.
He gets into his home and locks and bolts the door behind him. He leans against the door and tries to catch his breath, letting himself slide down to the floor. Finally, safe at last. He slaps at his neck again. Another fly. It must have been in his coat. He takes off his jacket and shirt, shaking them out, and is surprised to see more flies come out, but also other bugs like worms and cockroaches. He keeps shaking, panicking now, as more and more bugs fall from his clothes. He can see in the mirror on the wall that his body is covered in bites, but that's not what really has his attention. He gets close to the mirror, almost in a daze. This can't be right. He must be hallucinating. He looks in the mirror, reaches into his nose, and pulls out a cockroach. Flies crawl out of his mouth as he opens his mouth to scream, while behind him, rats start squeezing in under his door and crawling up his body until he is completely covered in a living, writhing mass of vermin. Many of the anomalies studied by the SCP Foundation are cruel, horrific, and utterly mysterious. And this is one of the rare cases that embodies all three. Because this is SCP-027, also known as the Vermin God. SCP-027 is a phenomenon with strange and frightening properties that seems to affect one human subject at a time. When someone becomes a host to this anomaly, they will find that they are constantly surrounded by swarms of various types of vermin, parasites, and other pests. The human host has no ability to control or command these creatures, and in fact, the animals will often show aggression towards the host, biting and scratching at them as well as any other person who comes near. It is unknown what causes this effect, but once someone has become a host to SCP-027, the effect appears to be permanent. The swarms of vermin that follow the host do not appear instantly, and instead tend to follow the same pattern of showing up in waves. First, swarms of flying insects, including gnats and flies, will begin to form a cloud around the unlucky individual. Next, non-flying creatures such as lice, cockroaches, worms, spiders, and rats will begin to crawl on the host. The more time that passes, the more of all of these that will appear. Should the host try to leave the location, some of the pests will attempt to cling to them or follow behind, but many of the others will disperse. As soon as the host stops again, though, the process will repeat, and they will once again soon be surrounded by bugs and rodents. While there is no way for a host to rid themselves of the SCP-027 anomaly, the phenomenon has been known to be transferred to a new host, but only following the death of the first. It appears that 027 will continue to jump from host to host, and has likely done this many times in the past. Preliminary research into just how long SCP-027 has existed is ongoing, but early signs point to it having existed for potentially hundreds of years. SCP-027 was first identified by the Foundation when, in the 1990s, a male in his late 30s was found in an abandoned warehouse that was completely overrun with rats and insects. The man was filthy, malnourished, and covered in bites and scratches from a variety of pests. He also showed symptoms of deteriorating mental health, likely caused by a combination of heavy substance abuse and sleep deprivation, neither of which were unexpected, given his horrendous circumstances. The anomalous properties of the subject were quickly recognized by field agents, and he was brought to an SCP Foundation site, where he unfortunately died while still under observation. An autopsy later revealed that over 70% of the man's body at the time of death consisted of a colony of rats that had nested in his abdomen and had been living there long enough to produce at least several generations of offspring. Around 6 days after the man's death, a Foundation security officer at the site where the man had been held reported to medical staff that he was experiencing breathing issues. He told them they began after he had been woken up by what he thought was a housefly crawling up his nose, and he did remember the fly coming back out. Later investigations would reveal that this statement was true, and that the fly laid a clutch of eggs in his sinus cavity as well. The security officer was placed under observation, and following the appearance of more types of vermin, he was classified as SCP-02702. The man who died was then reclassified as SCP-02701, and SCP-027 was redefined as an anomalous effect rather than one individual. It is still unknown just how SCP-027 attracts animals, or why it chooses the ones it does to summon to its location. Neither SCP-02701 or 02 have expressed any communication with any kind of entity or the feeling that one was present, and were unable to provide any additional information on the mysterious qualities of the anomaly. In an interview that took place not long after the security officer was identified as a host and placed into containment, he only described feeling dirty and itchy, like he needed a shower. He was deeply frightened by what was happening and expressed the desire to rid himself of the anomalous effect as soon as possible so that he could rejoin his family. Research into the anomaly continues, but analysis of the current host has been inconclusive at best. The lack of understanding about just what SCP-027 is, how its anomalous effect functions, and how it jumps to a new host has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Euclid. The current host for the anomaly is being held in a 5x5 meter cell with a raised grated floor that is connected to a strong vacuum system to trap any vermin that appear. Any creatures that are removed from the cell are to be incinerated, except for a small portion which are sent to research teams for analysis, though so far, all animals have appeared to be completely non-anomalous in nature. SCP-02702 is to be monitored by at least 2 Foundation personnel at all times, and in the event that the subject exhibits any odd behavior or an unexpected species of animal is discovered in the cell, it is to be reported to a Level 4 personnel immediately. Security personnel assigned to 027 duty are to be vaccinated against all possible animal-borne diseases and have permission to subdue the subject with tranquilizers should the need arise. Should the subject appear to be experiencing a serious medical event, all high-value personnel should be moved far away from the current host to lower the chance of them becoming a host to the anomaly. And no personnel of Level 4 clearance or higher should approach within 200 meters of the subject at all, until SCP-027 and its strange properties are better understood.
The train station buzzed with life, a cacophony of voices blending with the rhythmic clatter of trains arriving and departing. Farewells and reunions swirled around, filled with hope and sorrow. Amidst the crowd, a mother clutched a small, weathered box to her chest, her hands trembling. "Don't do anything, brave," she urged, her voice tight as she gazed up at her son. Though he stood tall in her eyes, he was still the child she had raised, full of dreams. The son forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The sharp whistle of the train cut through the noise, a reminder of the time slipping away. He leaned down and embraced her, as though trying to still the storm of dread swirling inside him. "Take this." She pressed the box into his hands. "Don't ever open it. But if you're captured, give it to them as a gift." The boy took the box from his mother. "Do you promise me?" "I promise," he said, feeling the weight of her words. He glanced at his little sister, her wide eyes filled with innocence as she sat in her wheelchair. Leaning down, he kissed her gently on the forehead. "Be brave," she whispered, the sincerity of her words piercing through the noise around them. The train's whistle shrieked again, and the boy stepped back, his heart aching as he waved one last goodbye. The train lurched into motion, pulling him away from everything familiar into the unknown. The battlefield air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. The boy, having quickly become a young man from the demands of war, gripped his rifle tighter. Try as he might, the sound of explosions and gunfire drowned out all thoughts of home as battle raged all around him. "Get down!" a voice shouted, and he dove into a trench, just as an explosion rocked the earth nearby. The young man fought fiercely, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each encounter was a blur of movement and instinct. Every moment, a razor-thin line between life and death. In the thick of the fighting, the din of war faded, leaving only the pounding of his own heart echoing in his ears. He saw his comrades fall, one by one, their lives extinguished in an instant. It was a relentless tide of violence, and he was swept along with it. But then, in a moment, everything changed. A large blast threw him off his feet. Dazed and disoriented, he looked up to see enemy soldiers approaching, their faces shrouded in grim determination. Before he could react, they seized him, dragging him and the few other soldiers that were still alive away from the battlefield they had fought so fiercely to defend. The soldiers dragged him through the mud, and the young man glanced up. Through blurred eyes, he could just barely see where they were taking him. Towards a large trench where others of his fellow soldiers were already lined up. He watched as they were shot without warning and tumbled back into the mass grave. Suddenly, his mother's parting words filled his ears.
"Give it to them as a gift."
"Wait!" the young man hoarsely shouted. "Please, wait!" I have something to offer you. The soldiers dragging him abruptly stopped and looked at each other with skepticism. What do you mean? One demanded. You have information? I have this, he said, pulling the small box from his pocket, the one his mother had given him. The one he had managed to keep safe with him this whole time, across countless battles and hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles of war. The soldiers looked at each other again, and their skepticism turned into mockery. The two men both began to laugh as one of them snatched the box from the young man's hands. Without pausing, he opened the box, tossing the wooden lid to the ground. What's this? A treasure? He mockingly asked. The object in the box glinted in the light. It wasn't a treasure at all, just a simple silver spoon. His laughter stopped. Very well. In repayment, you won't die. Not here, at least. The young man didn't have any time to question what this meant, though, since a club immediately struck the back of his head, sending him into a deep, dark black. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a damp, dark cell, raucous laughter echoing off the walls. The same soldiers who had taken him on the battlefield were now sitting with several others, talking to each other in their native tongue. The one who had dragged the young man began to act out a pantomime of the young man offering him the box, much to the amusement of his fellow soldiers. The young man watched through the bars of his cell as the soldier now reached into the box and grabbed the spoon, holding it up like a war trophy as the group laughed harder and harder, none more than the one holding the spoon. His laughter, though, abruptly stopped, and a sharp crack echoed through the room, louder than any bullet. The soldier's body twisted grotesquely, his spine bending backward with an unnatural snap. His eyes bulged wide, panic overtaking his once smug face, before he crumpled to the ground. The rest of the soldiers gasped and stepped back, horrified at what they had just seen. But try as they might, none of them could look away. Their compulsive curiosity forced them all to keep looking at the twisted body of their friend, or, more specifically, at the spoon he still clutched in his hand. Slowly, carefully, one of the soldiers stepped forward, kneeled down, and reached for the spoon. He had to work to pry it from the paralyzed hand of his comrade, and the moment he gripped the handle, another crack rang out, even louder this time, as he too saw his spine fold backwards at a perfect 90-degree angle. The soldier fell to the floor, the spoon dropping to the ground near him. But the other soldiers didn't run. Just like their friend, one by one, they each watched in turn as another picked up the spoon, and immediately upon having a firm grip, saw their body contort backwards at a right angle. The young man couldn't believe what was happening. Soldier after soldier watched, waiting for their turn to be bent backwards, until finally, only one was left. He struggled, trying to resist the strange compulsion to pick up the cursed spoon, but he couldn't. He too joined his comrades, his spine snapping as his body collapsed to the floor. As the last soldier fell, so too did the spoon, landing not far from the young man's cell. He could suddenly feel it calling to him. He didn't just want to hold the spoon, he needed it. If he just reached out through the bars of his cell, he could almost touch it. Shouts in a language he barely understood echoed in from the corridor. Moments later, the door to the damp room swung open with a loud bang. A group of soldiers, with different uniforms from those who had captured him, stormed in. One of the soldiers surveilled the scene, the soldiers that lay twisted and broken on the ground. "What in the hell happened here?" he exclaimed, his gaze landing on the silver spoon. As the soldier curiously reached for the spoon, the sergeant inadvertently kicked it away and pointed at the young man's cell. "Get him out!" he barked. His command snapped the soldiers into action. "Please, the spoon!" the young man cried, his voice desperate and frantic. But the soldiers didn't understand the language he was speaking. They were too busy fishing through the pockets of the fallen soldiers, trying to find keys to his cell. "Calm down, we're trying to help you, son," the sergeant replied, his tone edged with annoyance. Finally, one soldier finds the keys. The door to his cell swings open, and the young man dives to the ground. The Allied soldiers exchanged awkward glances. They initially believed the young man was dropping to his knees in gratitude for being saved. Instead, he was scrambling across the dirt floor, desperately searching for something. "I think he's looking for this," one of the soldiers said, holding up the spoon by the tip of its handle. The young man's eyes widened. "That's mine!" he shouted, lunging toward it. Several Allied soldiers grabbed the young man, unsure of his intentions, but as he moved, the soldier with the spoon instinctively tightened his grip on it. A loud crack pierced the air. Everyone turned just in time to see the Allied soldier bend backward at a perfect 90-degree angle, his face contorting in pain and shock as he collapsed to the ground. A wave of compulsive curiosity began to spread among the soldiers as they stared at the scene. One by one, they all started to move closer to the spoon. Their sergeant, a seasoned SCP agent who had decided to join the fight against tyranny and whose long service with the Foundation had given him experience with strange anomalies, barked out a sharp command. "Leave it!" he shouted, catching one of his men just as he touched the handle with the tips of his fingers. "Everybody step back!" The urgency in his voice snapped the soldiers out of their daze. They instinctively moved aside, creating space between themselves and the spoon's sinister aura. Slowly, carefully, the sergeant knelt down and scooped the spoon into the wooden box, his movements deliberate and steady. As the young man watched the sergeant slide the box's lid closed, he couldn't help but chuckle bitterly to himself. The very object that was meant to protect him had almost become the harbinger of his death. This seemingly harmless object, now classified as SCP-463, is deceptively simple, a spoon that bends its victims. When gripped by human hands, it forces their spine to snap backward at a 90-degree angle just below the T6 thoracic vertebra, resulting in near instantaneous death or severe paralysis. Its effects are immediate and unavoidable. No gloves, barriers, or protective gear can prevent the violent contortions. Despite its mundane appearance, SCP-463 has claimed multiple lives during testing. Strangely, it only affects humans, showing no unusual properties when handled by non-human subjects. Even indirect contact, such as through gloves, does nothing to reduce its deadly impact, suggesting the spoon possesses some sort of psychic or anomalous trigger. Researchers at the SCP Foundation have conducted extensive analysis using neutron imaging, MRI scans, and other methods, but the true nature of SCP-463's lethal effect remains unknown. All they can observe are the horrifying results, a sudden, violent muscle contraction that bends the human body unnaturally. Currently, SCP-463 is housed in a secure containment site, kept in a small, reinforced glass display case. Transport and handling are strictly regulated, and personnel are prohibited from directly interacting with the spoon under any circumstances. After an incident during testing, food and utensils are no longer allowed near SCP-463's containment area, though the exact details of that incident remain classified. Let this story serve as a reminder: even the simplest, most ordinary objects can mask unimaginable danger. After all, who would have thought something as simple as a spoon could become such a deadly anomaly?
A man is lying in a hospital bed, and it is clear that he is not doing well. A group of doctors buzz around him performing various tests, checking his vital signs again and again. The man feels weak and a little disoriented, and the looks on the various doctors' faces tells him all he needs to know. Something is very wrong with him. Finally, there is a break in the commotion, and the doctors stop prodding at him and peering into his eyes with a bright, blinding light. All of the doctors and nurses leave the room except for one. The doctor steps towards the man and tells him that he has some bad news. You see, before the doctor can finish, someone else emerges from the shadows in the corner of the room and taps him on the shoulder. I'll handle this. The man hadn't noticed this person, but he can see now that he's dressed in a suit, and unlike the doctors, he doesn't have any identifying items like a name tag or badge. Maybe he's some kind of professor, or a renowned surgeon who is going to tell him how they will make him better. The doctor steps back from the bed, but the man in the suit tells the doctor that it would be best if he and the patient could be left alone. Just for a moment, of course. The doctor nods in agreement and leaves the room. The man in the suit waits until the door is closed behind him to continue. He tells the sick man that he has a rare condition, quite rare. So rare, in fact, that you're the only person to ever have it, the only recorded case in history. The man in the suit sits down on the bed next to the man and takes his hand, lifting it up, examining it. The man's hand is an odd color. It has a slight green tint to it, and the skin itself appears to be taking on a fibrous quality. The sick man feels very tired, but he manages to whisper, "Are you a doctor? Are you going to help me?" The man in the suit responds, "Yes, I'm a doctor. Of sorts."
a doctor and a researcher. I work for a very important organization, and I specialize in cases just like yours. Well, not exactly like yours. You're unique. Quite special, in fact. The sick man offers a weak smile. I'm very lucky. Oh yes, very lucky indeed. Well, not because of your condition, of course, but because I am here. You see, if it's all right with you, we'd like for you to come with us, to come stay at one of our facilities for a while. We can't promise that we'll be able to figure out exactly what's happening or why. But if we can, we have a much better chance of figuring out how to cure it. To cure you, so you can go back to a normal life. Do I have much of a choice? The sick man asks. Of course you do. It's completely up to you. I think this would be your best course of action, your best by far, in fact. But we can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. The sick man looks down at his greenish hand again, turning it over in front of his face, examining the small growths that seem to be sprouting from his skin. When do we leave? Right now, the man in the suit tells him. The nurses will come get you ready, and then we'll be on our way. The man in the suit leaves the room and closes the door behind him. Standing next to the door in the hallway are a pair of men wearing tactical uniforms like a SWAT team. The man in the suit tells them that luckily they won't be needed today. This one is coming easy. The sick man lies on a bed, but now he is in a new room. This one is even more sterile than the hospital, with cold concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lights. Just like in the hospital, he's surrounded by a seemingly never-ending cast of doctors, nurses, and researchers. They too poke and prod at him, take samples, and administer all kinds of tests. As time goes on, the man's condition only grows worse. It seems there's nothing that they can do to stop his condition from advancing. The green color spreads across his body, and his skin soon becomes woody and stiff. If he sits in one place for too long without moving, tiny fibers emerge from his skin, like probing roots looking for soil. All the while, the man grows weaker and more fragile. Even the slightest movement seems to cause him great pain. The doctor who originally brought the man to the facility gathers with a small group in the observation room next to the man's containment cell. They discuss the results of a recent test, which showed that much of the melanin in his skin has somehow been replaced with chlorophyll, and that the fibrous quality of his skin is being caused by the appearance of cellulose around his cells. In other words, he isn't just starting to look like a plant. He's truly becoming a plant, and there doesn't seem to be anything they can do to stop it. Try as they might, they haven't found a single clue as to what is causing the man's condition, or how to treat it. The man, though, seems strangely at peace with his fate. He's told that they're going to allow him to live, whether that be as a man or as a plant in containment, for as long as he can stay alive, and that he will be well taken care of to make the whole process as comfortable for him as possible. Even though they failed to find a cure for his anomalous disease, they will do everything in their power to make sure he doesn't suffer. A tragic yet familiar tale for the SCP Foundation. A normal person is subjected to an abnormal situation that completely changes their life, and not for the better. At least in this situation, the Foundation appears to have shown a rare glimpse of their own humanity, opting to make this safe class anomaly's existence as painless as possible, rather than force it to endure a lifetime of painful tests and studies. Or at least that's what you've been led to believe. Unfortunately, everything you've just seen about SCP-1500 is a lie. Those with Level 3 clearance, though, can learn the truth, which is that SCP-1500 is actually an extremely dangerous anomaly, whose true identity must be hidden from even the majority of the Foundation, for reasons you'll soon learn. SCP-1500 is not a man suffering from a condition that causes him to slowly transform into a plant-like being, but is actually a greenish-gray, smooth-skinned humanoid with no facial features at all. Its limbs are long and multi-jointed, and its abdomen is highly distended. The skin is exceptionally durable and tough, and though SCP-1500 has no visible sense organs like ears or a nose, it still appears to possess senses that are roughly equivalent to an average human's. The entity is incapable of speech, owing to its lack of a mouth, and it has not shown a need to eat, breathe, or sleep at all. In addition to the strange appearance of SCP-1500, its primary anomalous effect is the impact it has on any human that comes within its line of sight, or rather what would be its line of sight if it had any eyes. Those that do find that they will soon begin experiencing headaches, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. These symptoms will increase over the next several minutes, with the headaches becoming more and more debilitating, and the feelings of nausea and fear growing until eventually the subject passes out. They will remain unconscious for roughly 15 seconds, after which they will awaken and claim to have no memory of ever being exposed to SCP-1500. But something else strange also happens to the subject after waking. When asked to describe the creature known as SCP-1500, they will no longer remark on its faceless head or long twisted limbs. Instead, they will describe the creature as being an average-looking Caucasian male. Even stranger is that to them, it now has a name, Zachary Callahan. In further interviews with subjects exposed to SCP-1500, it became clear that many of their memories had been reshaped to now include the entity in its human-looking Zachary Callahan form. They would often describe him as a close friend from childhood or early adulthood, and one that played a significant role in their lives. They also claim that they are perfectly capable of communicating with Zachary Callahan, able to carry on conversations with him, while all the observing researchers will see is an apparently one-sided conversation between the subject and the featureless gray-skinned creature. While Foundation personnel have found that they are able to remove the false memories from the subject's minds through the use of amnestics, they have yet to be able to reverse the effect that causes the subject to see SCP-1500 as a human being, and everyone who has been exposed continues to see the entity as Zachary Callahan forevermore. It is still unknown what kind of long-term effects this exposure may have, or how dangerous to their mental or physical health it will turn out to be. Even more concerning is that evidence has emerged that SCP-1500 may be able to affect more than just those in its immediate presence. Recently, a United States senator was giving a televised speech on a rather uninteresting topic. The speech started out normal enough, but then the senator began to relay an anecdote about a childhood fishing trip he had taken with a friend. You won't be surprised to learn that according to the senator, the friend's name was none other than Zachary Callahan. Investigations into the senator's background concluded that there was no person by that name of the appropriate age in the area where he grew up. It was also discovered the senator had suffered an especially bad migraine at a dinner party the week before the speech. Further research into SCP-1500's memory-altering effects have also revealed that they might just be more intrusive than first believed. Rather than simply appearing as an old friend, subjects exposed to 1500 have begun to report that Zachary Callahan actually played a much more prominent role in their lives, either as a close relative, a parental figure, or even a former lover. In each of these cases, the subjects described their feelings for Zachary Callahan as ones of adoration, and that he made them feel protected and loved. Most troubling of all is a recent addendum to the SCP-1500 file, which describes the very latest research on the anomaly and its effects. It is now estimated that as many as 23,000 people all across the world have been affected by the creature, with the idea of Zachary Callahan implanted into their memories. It is unknown why it is trying to spread its influence so far and wide, but one clue that may point to a nefarious purpose is that it seems to be disproportionately targeting political and military figures, as well as SCP Foundation personnel. Following these new developments, classification of SCP-1500 to Keter was requested and granted. Due to the risk that SCP-1500 poses through its anomalous effects, and its powerful ability to influence those in positions of great power, it is permanently kept in a modified humanoid containment cell at Site-17. No personnel are allowed to enter into its containment chamber under any circumstances, nor are there security cameras in its cell. A false containment document describing a human male with an anomalous plant-like effect was placed in the database in order to deter further investigation into the real SCP-1500. And any personnel who experience painful, persistent headaches are immediately transferred away from Site-17, while any who attempt to breach containment are immediately terminated. Is SCP-1500 planting the seeds for something big by infiltrating the minds of some of the most influential people on Earth? Or is it merely looking for a connection, as it takes on a form that it wishes it could have, in the only way it can, inside an imagination? Perhaps one day, we will know the answer. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-1500, the story of me and my best friend Zach, and the time we rode motorcycles across Southeast Asia. Wait a second. I didn't do that with Zach. Like SCP-163, the old Castaway, for another truly bizarre guest of the SCP Foundation, whose story you definitely won't forget. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.